Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Environment, Infrastructure and Economic Development Committee meeting for the 31st of May 2023. If I can first introduce the top table. On my left, we have David Littlejohn, the Head of Planning and Development. On my right, we have Adam Taylor from Committee Services. And online, we have the Vice Convener, Bailey Mike Williamson. I'll now ask Adam to confirm any apologies and take the roll call and notify substitutions. Thank you.
Convener. Just to say apologies from Councillor Waters, and I'm substituting for him.
Thank you. Yep.
There we go. Thanks, Convener. So, as Councillor Lang's alluded to, we have apologies this morning from Councillor Waters with himself substituting, and we've also had apologies from Councillor Robertson with Councillor Cuthbert substituting. All other members are actually present with us in the chambers with the exception of Vice Convener Bailey Williamson. If I could just ask Bailey Williamson to confirm if he's online.
Yes, I am.
That's great. Thank you. That's everybody present.
Thank you, Arch. And if I can just remind members to use the chat box as normal to ask questions and make comment. Can I ask if there are any declarations? Someone quickly do that. Magda's doing that now, I think. We'll continue whilst Bailey McLaren seeks to join in electronically. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest in respect to the business on the agenda today? No, I see none, thank you. Can we move to the minutes of the meeting on the 29th of March 2023? Can we agree those minutes? Thank you. Moving to item 4, the outstanding business statement. Can I ask if there are any questions on the outstanding business statement? Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Actually, more of a comment. Would you rather I waited?
No, please go ahead.
Thanks. It's on the issue in Noble Road in Invergowrie. I just want to put on record my thanks for the meeting that's arranged with Mark and Darrell, I think it was, to discuss this and other issues in our ward. I think it was actually just myself and Councillor Bailey that were at that meeting, but I do have some real concerns that I just want to put on record about the length of time it's taken to get these double yellow lines there, which is preventing a bus getting past the sheltered housing and into the station. I just wondered if anybody had any update as to when we might actually get them on the ground.
I'm afraid I'm not in a position to give an update at the moment, but I share your concerns and I'm more than happy to follow up on that for you. Thank you. Can we move on from the outstanding business statement?
Sorry, Convener.
Councillor Duff.
The outstanding business statement says we're due to get a verbal update on the deposit return scheme today.
Yeah.
From Mr. Butterworth, I believe.
Okay. Is Mark Butterworth online? Mark, can you make a comment?
I am indeed, yeah. Thanks, Convener. Morning, members. Yeah, in terms of the deposit return scheme, we hadn't intended on sending some information out to businesses. I think I'm sure members will be aware that there's quite a lot of uncertainty about the deposit return scheme at the moment. I think the initial implementation date was August, and it looks like now that could actually potentially be March 2024 or further back, to be perfectly honest. There's also some uncertainty around the materials which form part of that scheme and whether glass will be included as well as plastic and cans. So there's a lot of, as I say, uncertainty. When we do get some clarity and it's clear in terms of timescales and how the scheme will be operated, we will come back to members and we will provide information to businesses as well. But at this moment in time, I think any information we put out there could actually be potentially out of date or incorrect very quickly. So unfortunately, we haven't done that because of that lack of clarity, but we certainly will keep an eye on changes. Thanks, convener.
Thank you for that. I see no further comment. Can we move on then now to item 5, the developer contributions and affordable housing supplementary guidance update? And can I ask Lucy Sumner to introduce this report? Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Good morning, committee members and other attendees. Thank you for hearing this report on updates to the developer contributions and affordable housing supplementary guidance. Members will note from the contents of the report that our current adopted statutory supplementary guidance was approved by the Council's Strategic Policy and Resources Committee in January 2020. Officers have completed draft updates to this guidance, including developer contribution rates to reflect inflation changes, the document's presentation and other modifications. The changes to the guidance are listed in section 4.7 of the report. The draft guidance document is also appended to the report in its 2 parts. So in approving the recommendations of this report, the next steps of this review process, which are set out in section 5.16 of the report, will be initiated. This includes a period of public consultation on the draft guidance. Officers will provide a report back to committee on the outcome of that public consultation, and the next step would be to submit the draft guidance to Scottish Ministers for adoption. It should be noted that this report presents an update of the guidance and is limited by the policy framework of the adopted Local Development Plan, LDP2. Any consideration of new or substantive policy changes can take place through the plan review process as we work towards LDP3. Thank you, and we will be happy to help with any questions on the report.
Thank you very much. And I see a first question from Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I wouldn't often make a committee question parochial, but I am on this occasion. And I was wondering specifically about Westcon Fawns. There's a development appeared in Westcon Fawns. I understand there'll be some transport infrastructure funding comes along with that, but it doesn't seem to be able to be spent in Westcon Fawns. And I wonder if I could get some clarity on if that's the case and why that's the case and where that money might be going. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes, I'm not sure that's directly relevant to what we're discussing today, but I'd ask Ben Wilson to make a comment. Thank you.
So the Westcon Fawns development is the subject of pending legal agreement negotiations at the moment, so it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss that in specific detail. The supplementary guidance as it stands and following this update provides a general policy framework for site-specific transport contributions to be sought, and so that's unaffected by this review, and that's relevant to the Westcon Fawns case.
If you may.
So if we take Westcon Fawns out of the equation completely and maybe talk in general terms, is the contribution in relation to transport, does it have to be spent in the area that's affected by the development, or is it spent somewhere else?
David Littlejohn will take this part of the question.
I mean, yes. The contribution needs to directly mitigate the impact of development. So we have a supplementary guidance policy that allows a contribution generally from all development in and around Perth towards the Perth Transport Futures strategy. And that was agreed with Scottish ministers. So all new development is making a contribution to the delivery of that strategy. And then, as Lucy indicated, there's also site-specific infrastructure requirements, which are the subject of negotiation, and that's clearly a matter between the planning authority and the applicant at that stage. And we're not finished that process, if you like, at Westcon Fons.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kigali.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. I was just wondering what work has been done so far in terms of engaging with developers before it goes out to consultation, just to make sure we're bringing them, along with us on this, or whether that's something that's going to happen at a later date.
David? Oh, sorry, Lucy.
Thank you. So we are usually in contact with the developers through the planning process and through the big place conversation as well towards LDP3. So we have a good feeling about what developers are thinking towards plan review type matters, and the purpose of the public consultation that we would be initiating following this committee would be the exercise that we'd be undertaking to gather the feedback from developers and the industry, as it were. So it helps to have something to take out to them. So this committee is the first step in that process.
Thank you. Bailey Belly.
Thank you, Convener. I'm looking at the bottom of page 53 of the pack, which mentions that wherever practical, the affordable housing should be integrated with and indistinguishable from market housing, and that's mentioned in another part of the report as well. It's a laudable aim, and my question is, have we ever achieved that in practice? And the reason for asking the question is that all the developments I'm aware of recently, there's always some small cost saving that we can see the developers taken, whether it's a different style of window mullioning or a different treatment of the hard standing for the cars. Have we ever actually achieved the test of indistinguishability? And if not, what more could we do here to achieve that? Thank you.
I think the term here is tenure blind, but I think David can answer this better than me. Thank you.
I mean, that is the aspiration, and we have achieved it in a number of sites, and I think there's some good examples around the area where that has been achieved, and to the lay person, it's impossible to tell the difference. It's always going to be a matter of judgment relating to the particular site. The needs of RSLs, it's more difficult to integrate, to make flats look identical to other types of property. So, but the aspiration is, the convener said, to be tenure blind, so that we're not introducing any form of intentional or otherwise discrimination. So that's, if that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you. We now move to Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. On pages 16 and then again on 36 and 37, it makes reference to Auchterarder A9 injunction improvements. At point 5.8 on page 37, it talks about developer contribution calculation and says the total cost of the project in accordance with 2007 figures is estimated at 10.52 million. Transport Scotland's contributed 1.4 million towards the Loaning Head junction improvements. The remaining 9.12 million will be provided by the consortium delivering Auchterarder development, etc. The question really is the estimate of 10.52 in 2007, which is 16 years ago, is that still realistic? And if so, is the remaining 9.12, has that been realised? Where exactly are we? Can we give us some answers, please?
Thank you for that. Lucy, can you pick up on that one? Thank you.
Yes, the Auchterarder A9 section of the Developer Contribution Supplementary Guidance relates to the Loaning Head works which have been completed, and those were completed by the Developer Consortium probably back in 2007. I haven't been around long enough to know, but that would have been the time that the works were completed, the costing. So that's where that figure comes from. The mechanism from the supplementary guidance seeks to gather contributions towards the costs of those works. So hopefully that clarifies.
Thank you for that. Yeah, at at number 5 on page 36, it goes on to talk about that the A9 junction improvements are for Loning Head and Aberystwyth. There's been nothing done at Aberystwyth. I was just wondering, has that 9.12 been consumed by Loning Head, or will we see some further improvements at Aberystwyth? Thank you.
The figures in the supplementary guidance do relate to the works that have been completed at the moment, and if there were further works, then that would be incorporated into supplementary guidance to further the mechanism that we already have in place.
I'll need to take offline. Thank you. I'm not getting what I need from that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this paper is more about the mechanisms for raising the contributions and not about the total costs of the projects, but your questions are valid regardless, and if you could take that offline, thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Throughout the report, it obviously talks about developer contributions for things like education and transport. And at paragraph 4.7, again at 5.8 and again at 5.13, and I think elsewhere in the report, it has statements like the rates will be revised routinely in line with inflation oblique project costs without the need for further formality. What exactly does that sort of mean? Will this committee be advised when changes are being made to these contribution levels? Thank you.
David?
I mean, yes, it's just it's the ability to move in line with construction indices to change the contribution without seeking specific approval every time that we want to do that. But the committee would be notified as and when that happens. We just don't want to delay the process. It's trying to make sure there's a minimum amount of time between in-gathering contributions at the right rate and the work happening. We don't want a big gap where we're in-gathering at the lower rate when we know construction inflation is much further ahead. But we use standard industry construction indices, so none of it is a surprise to developers, for example.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. I would just like to ask a question related to section 5.6.2 in the initial document. I think it's page number 4. There's a comment there talking about the affordable housing credit system. There's a statement there saying, however, it has not been well utilised and has proven difficult to implement and monitor. Furthermore, it's also found to undermine sequential approach to delivery of affordable housing. Could somebody expand on that a little bit just to give me a bit more background detail? Thanks.
Thank you for that. Lucy, can you expand on that? Thank you. Sorry, Ben.
Yes, it's the credit system has been in the guidance for some time. It's relatively unusual in a Scottish context to have this. Not too many market developers have taken up the option, and what we've found in practice is the intention was that it would provide more affordable housing in locations of greatest need, but in practice, when it has been used, it's resulted in us not getting affordable housing on site when otherwise we might have got it and we would have wanted that. And has also led at times to confusion about under what circumstances credits can be gained. So the proposal is to align this with policies across wider Scotland. Existing affordable housing credits that have been issued will still be valid until their expiry date. So it would phase out, but the change would mean that we wouldn't issue any new affordable housing credits.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. A couple of questions. My first one is on time limits. In part 1 of the guidance on developer contributions, I'm not seeing in there what time limit we have to use it, whereas in part 2, it must the affordable housing ones must be used within 5 years. my recollection was that there was a 10-year limit on using developer contributions, so I wondered whether that had been reduced. And also, have we lost any developer contributions by them being claimed back through our not using them?
Thank you. I'll go to Lucy certainly for the first part of that question and perhaps the second as well. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So the utilisation period is in part 1 of the draft guidance, which is appended to the report. That's at 3.19, and you are right, it's 10 years for primary education contributions made to the council and 10 years for transport infrastructure contributions made to the council. For affordable housing, that's right, it's in part 2 as well, and that's 5 years. So we have 5 years in which to spend. So second part of the question, have we ever returned any contributions? I believe there was one occasion we returned one sum of education that hit the 10-year limit, and the applicant was eligible to apply, and they did. That's as far as I know so far.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. And my second question was just in terms of the index linking, which was just referred to. I was kind of surprised to see that that wasn't what we did already. So I'm just wondering whether there have been any situations where the council is losing out through not having index linked in prior years, you know, whether the developer contributions aren't sufficient to cover the cost of any of the transport or education infrastructure because they haven't been updated.
It's a question in several parts, and we have used index linking for a long time, and that has been the standard practice. In the case of education contributions, it's a combination of whether the contribution is being used largely to expand an existing facility. So it's going to take out of the equation a brand new development where the only reason for a new primary school, for example, is because of that housing development, in which case the developer is going to build the entire cost of the school. Elsewhere, it's a contribution towards, it's a proportionate contribution towards the expansion of the facility, and you know, that's why we're upgrading today that education contribution in line with inflation. It hasn't been an issue until recently because construction inflation has been pretty small in truth. So we're slightly behind the curve, if I'm being absolutely honest, in raising it now. In terms of wider infrastructure, again, the same principle applies. There is one project where the infrastructure has not been index linked, and it relates to part of the Perth Transport Futures project at the phase 3 of that project, which you'll be aware of.
And just quickly, how much were we back? How much are we out on that phase 3 by not having index linked it?
I mean, this is not directly relevant to this paper, but I'm happy to answer the question. And it's not, I'm not trying to be evasive. It depends on the extent of the scheme. So the developer is required to provide or fund the cost of a link road, but not the wider infrastructure that we might want to put in place, and that includes, you know, a park and choose. But as things stand in terms of the current agreed contribution, there may be some scope for negotiation relative to our estimated cost of that stretch of road. We're probably out by $1 million or so. But that's you know, that's a specific negotiation on a specific instance that isn't covered by this particular supplementary guidance.
Thank you, Arch. And Councillor Stewart, I'm sure you managed to fit in more questions there than I had fingers on one hand, but well, you're very clever at that. And the last question is Councillor Cuthbert.
I've actually got 3 questions, convener, so you maybe
On you go.
fingers than 3, but I'll do them one at a time if I may. The first one is a simple one. It's under section 4.5. There's reference to the affordable housing MOG. I couldn't find any sort of data on that. I'm just wondering who's on that committee. as in which councillors?
I'm not aware of the full membership, but it's convened by Councillor McKeown. And Adam says he will send you the details of the full membership in due course.
Thank you. That was the first one. The second one relates to John Duff's query. I'm just wondering, have we actually considered just linking the developer contributions and any conditions that put on developments to the cost index, the index of construction, so that it's an automatic thing and it's literally pulled straight from that data, so that you don't have to keep bringing things back here?
David?
I mean, yes, I think that's the intent behind the recommendation is to automatically make that link and not to seek specific committee approval each time that changes.
So will that actually be in the wording on the developer contributions paper?
Yes, if there's not already a section included in the draft guidance, then there will be.
I'm sure there's something in there that talks about automatic updating of amounts, but variations to conditions, if you like, will come back to committee.
Okay, thank you for that. The other thing is a wider question. Kinross has been going through a lot of development over the last 50 years or so. In the last 10 years, it's gone up by 20%. And what's happening is you get individual housing developments that you can't actually ask them to make a contribution of specific contribution, because quite often there's a cumulative effect of all these different developments. So there's certain roads that are really busy now where they were much quieter previously. I'm wondering if there's ever been any consideration to doing a wider sort of developer contribution for places that have got large numbers of new housing being proposed. Because we've got a few examples here, but there's quite a lot of areas where there isn't a developer contribution.
In many respects, that's what we've done already in the Perth context. So the Perth Transport Futures project was to recognise that the cumulative impact of all of these developments in and around Perth had on the local transport network justified a specific developer contribution towards that overall infrastructure requirement, as well as any site-specific infrastructure constraints. So yes, absolutely, it could be done if there's an evidence that cumulative impact is causing net detriment, I guess, on the road network in particular. That would be a matter I think we would need to look at. We absolutely would need to look at that as part of the LDP3 review. We can't introduce new supplementary guidance without being a kind of policy basis for that. So we need to go through the same process that we did do with Perth Transport Future, but that can be looked at LDP3, and I think that is our intent, to review across the piece what are appropriate developer contributions. And it's been discussed in other committees, for example, health care provision as an example of what could be an appropriate change to our approach. But that needs to be rooted in evidence and policy review, and that's the timing is now that we're starting that thinking in relation to LDP3.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is that Kinross has gone through this, if you like, in the past. And I can see places like Luncarty, Stanley, Blairgowrie. There's huge numbers of big estates coming in. Stanley's got 5. I know there's a master plan, but it's a question of, if we don't sort of do it now, we're always going to be too late in terms of these have already come in. So it's just obviously the timing difference.
I mean, yeah, individual developments. I mean, their impact on local infrastructure, local facilities is taken into account, and that's back to the the site-specific Section 75 negotiation. But it always has to be tied back to the evidence of the impact of that specific development on an area. Otherwise, there's no legal basis to do so. But I would like to think that we are looking at that for every development. If we've got it wrong, that's a different matter. But the intention is to really try to understand and nail down what those impacts will be at that planning stage prior to consents being issued.
Okay, Councillor Cuthbert. One last thing.
I hear what you're saying. I mean, I'm on the planning committee, so I know that the conditions have to be, and the contributions from the developers have to be site specific. So it's the impact of that one development on infrastructure. It's where you've got that cumulative impact of 3 or 4 developments, and suddenly you've actually got a problem caused cumulatively, and you can't charge it back, and it comes back to the council having to pay for it. And that's the issue I've got.
And it's a legitimate issue, and there's a process to go through to look at what we can do that, but we can't unilaterally introduce retrospectively charges on developments that have now been completed. So, you know, the question is more about the appropriateness of continuing development in a given area if the infrastructure can't support that development.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so I will now move the report. The report presents members with an overview of the Council's existing developer contributions and affordable housing supplementary guidance, which supports the Council's adopted local development plan. With the current version adopted in 2020, the report sets out the need to update certain sections of the guidance, including contribution rates, as well as key updates to the affordable housing section to support its implementation and delivery. The report highlights that the proposed updates to the supplementary guidance relate to the policy framework of our adopted LDP2, and opportunities to consider policy evolution for developer contributions and affordable housing will be considered as part of the Council's development plan review for LDP3. The updates contained within the report have been prepared in consultation with relevant council services, as well as the Affordable Housing Member Officer Working Group. In moving this report, officers will proceed to initiate a period of public consultation on the draft guidance document, which we have seen, appended to this report, to gather public and industry feedback. The responses gathered during that consultation will be reported back to this committee before the guidance is submitted to Scottish ministers as the next step in its adoption as statutory supplementary guidance. I'm happy to accept the recommendations in this report and move the paper for approval. Can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Yes, happy to second, convener.
Thank you. I'll now take comments, and Leader of the Council.
Thanks very much, convener. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers for bringing this report, and for Lucy Summer and Ben Wilson and others who are open to come and speak to MD who wishes to get more of an insight on how we collect and where we can collect developer contributions. So I thank them for their accessibility to myself and any others that want to get a better understanding of developer contributions. I welcome this report and the fact that we will be index linking developer contributions. I think that's very important in this unstable financial climate that we find ourselves in, and I don't think that they have to come back to this committee at every stage, but will be much more effective by letting officers continue to vary along with the index that they link themselves to. I also welcome the on-site provision of affordable housing being reinforced in this paper, and along with stressing that the fact that commuted sums for affordable housing will only be accepted in very limited circumstances. I think these are things that past planning committees have been very contentious, and I'm glad to see that we'll seem to be taking a new approach to the treatment of commuted sums and on-site provision of affordable housing, which I think is very important across all areas of Perth and Kinross, and especially in the smaller settlements and hamlets. So I welcome this paper. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes, you have asked for comment.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I just want to comment very briefly on Councillor Kigali's point about working with developers. I was pleased to hear the answer to that question. I think it's important that we take developers along with us on this journey. I think we all recognise that housing development brings with it affordable homes, and we do know for sure there's a shortage of affordable homes, and that's one way to get them. So pleased to hear that we're working with developers, and just encourage our officers to continue to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, I think this is a useful paper. I think the certainly a few of the planning applications that I've witnessed it being discussed at committee, the issue of the affordable housing and the indistinguishability of it, the blind tenure has been a point of contention. So I think hopefully the guidance in respect of the affordable housing is certainly part of that process of making sure that there's a clear understanding to help the planning process between the council, developers and residents and communities. I think as well that the index linking is a very sensible approach. Just on the question that I asked in relation to the index linking for the developer contributions and the answer that Mr. Littlejohn gave, I think it might be helpful if we got a briefing note on that, just on that particular issue about the Perth Transport Futures Phase 3, just because obviously that sum that was mentioned could be quite significant, and if we're needing to find that in the capital budget or wherever, just to have the background on that would be useful to maybe ask for a briefing note on that and get it on the outstanding business statement. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure that such a briefing note can be produced. I see no further requests for comment. Can we agree the recommendations of this paper? Agreed. Thank you very much. We now move to paper 6. The Communities Service Annual Performance Report 2022-23. And before I ask David Littlejohn to introduce this report, I would just say that questions here must relate to the committee's area of responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. It's my pleasure to introduce the Community's Annual Performance Report for the financial year 2022-23. This provides a high-level overview of how the teams within the service have performed over the course of the last year. The report gives an update on the progress made on delivering against the improvement actions and performance indicators agreed in last year's report. In previous years, we have brought forward a management improvement plan alongside the annual performance report. However, you might have already read the elected member briefing note issued yesterday about the changes to the reporting process this year as a transition between the old corporate plan and the new one. Work is currently being undertaken to develop a new corporate delivery and improvement plan, which is planned to come to the Council in October. This will allow us to focus on how the whole Council works together to deliver on the agreed strategic priorities and work in partnership with our communities. Within last year's Business Management Improvement Plan, we set out a number of priority actions. This annual performance report provides an update on these, and the final section outlines our progress in relation to the key performance targets set out last year. The report highlights some of the positive achievements that we have made against our outcomes. This includes continued delivery of the new Perth Museum, scheduled to open in spring next year. 36 grants approved for town centre retail hospitality premises improvements through the Open for Business Fund, typically for facade improvements. Additionally, 13 projects were approved through the Adapt Your Property Fund to repurpose vacant premises into other commercial or residential use, and the Vacant Property Feasibility Fund has provided support to 20 projects. There's been a 91.7% increase in library footfall this year when compared to the previous year, 21-22. This shows signs of a strong recovery. This picture is mirrored across many library authorities in Scotland as people have changed habits or seek their reading material and information elsewhere. The satisfaction levels with the library visits has increased by 17% since 2020-21. And the percentage of residents satisfied with local museums and galleries has also increased from 74% in 2021 to 95% in 22-23 against a target of 80%. However, the report also recognises some of the challenges that we still face as a service. Some areas which we still need to make further improvements include the percentage of vacant retail units in Perth, which has increased compared with the previous year to 10.5%. We will continue to provide support to retail and other businesses through a range of measures, including business advice, destination promotion through the newly improved Perth City website, media and digital channels, employment and business support, digital incentives and platforms providing current market and consumer data. There's also been a reduction in the number of vacant properties brought back into use compared with the previous year. Throughout 2022-23, the Business in Place team did operate with a reduced capacity, and this directly contributed or correlated with our ability to be proactive in vacant property work. So going forward, the capacity in this team has been restored, and I'm confident this should result in targets being achieved in future years. Overall, where improvements are identified, these will be reflected in the Corporate Delivery and Improvement Plan as actions for the future. The service management team is grateful to all our colleagues across the community services and to elected members for supporting us while we continue to make the best use of the resources available to us. While we have not got everything right or made progress on everything that we would have liked to have done in 22-23, it's certainly not through lack of commitment, dedication, passion and compassion from officers across the service. We are, Convener, more than happy to take any questions on the areas within the report which are within the remit of this committee, and these are clearly highlighted in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the first question is Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I think my question's perhaps directed at you and perhaps David as well, and it's regarding footfall levels in Perth City Centre. If my arithmetic is correct, we're anticipating a swing, to use a political paraphrase perhaps, from minus 4.5 to plus 4, that's 8.5%. Wonder if you genuinely think that's achievable, Convener, what the administration's plan is to make that happen, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the issue of bringing back the workforce to the levels in the office, that is in Perth, that we had before COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it is of course a concern to us, the problems being faced by the retail sector. And as an administration, we have had discussions and will be moving forward to seek to do all that we can to strengthen the city centre in all its various guises, including retail. However, we're not of the view that the council requiring council staff to work from premises is the solution. And we will be moving forward in the context of the world that we're living in now, where hybrid working is for the council and for many other employers the way we go about business. But if David Littlejohn would like to add more, please do. Thank you.
The question related to footfall target. I mean, footfall is a difficult concept in terms of translating that into spend. So measuring footfall, I think, is one thing, but actually measuring visitor spend is another. So going forward, we want to kind of focus more on the intelligence around spend. But we are seeing increases in footfall and have done so as more people do come back into the city centre. What they're doing whether in the city centre is the key point. And I think that's the part we want to measure going forward in the future. How are they spending their time and their money rather than just, literally capturing the number of people that are walking through the streets. So I think going forward, you'll see a change in that particular measure. But we are confident we are seeing that upswing again in footfall.
If I could just have a follow-up. So one of the bits of my question was, what do you intend to do to get from -4.5 to +4? Can you give us any specifics?
That's a combination of the things that we know we can do and do successfully. That's about events. That encourages more people into the city centre. It's about recognising the high street as being more than a place just to shop. It's a social high street. It's where people meet, eat, drink, participate in cultural activity. So as we move towards the opening of Perth Museum, already seen the environmental enhancements around City Hall completed. All of that contributes to increased dwell time and therefore increased spend time. So there's no silver bullet. It won't just be about retail. It's about the mix that we can offer in Perth and making Perth city centre an attractive place to spend time and therefore money.
Thank you. Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. I'm looking at page 86, and it's true to say that we've hit the ball out of the park on the library visits as well as the helping adults to improve employability and digital skills. So I think we should all pat ourselves on the back for that. My question, as is often the case on these committees, is in light of that really good performance last year, will we set ourselves an even more ambitious target for the next year in the successor to these improvement plans? Thank you.
I think I just want to check if any of my colleagues from that service are on the call. I'm not sure if perhaps Fiona Robertson is with us to answer that. I'm not hearing anybody offering themselves up. I think to be fair, I probably want to come back and answer that there is a point at which continuous improvement can't take place, and if we're reaching these dizzy heights, is it sustainable? I think is the question. Where's a year-on-year sustainable level? But if you don't mind, I can ask colleagues to come back with their thoughts on future years.
And if I may, I think there's a balance to be struck between setting ever more demanding but perhaps unrealistic targets and setting realistic targets that we know are in line with what might be achievable given the circumstances of society. Certainly there's been a growth back, I know, from library usage post-COVID, and we are keen to go on encouraging physical presence in the libraries. The libraries serve a very vital purpose for a section of our community, and I think targets will be set in accordance with that need. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. It's very much in conjunction with the last two questions stroke comments. On page 86, we talk about the targets and the achievement, and I think it's fantastic that we've had such achievements. My question originally was, were the numbers surprising or were the targets not particularly stretching? But let's accept that we've had some extraordinary success there. I would, however, like to visit the number of visits to libraries in person and online. I just wonder why, when we got 1 million in 2021, we expected it to go down to 350,000 the following year, when actually we burst out the park. If there's any comment on that, thank you.
So is that the number of online visits expected to go down as opposed to in-person visits?
No, the numbers are for number of library visits in person and online. In 2021, we had over 1 million, yet the target for 2022 was 350,000, but we achieved 1.2 million. And just my question originally was, are the numbers surprising, or were our targets not particularly realistic or stretching? Thank you.
All I can say is I'm surprised by that target for 22-23. There was concern post-COVID where I know from Culture Perth and Kinross, the number of online visits had gone up. And there was concern whether those online visits would transfer back into being in-person visits, or how the post-COVID world would evolve in terms of library visits. I hope that goes some way towards answering your concern. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to go back to Councillor Forbes' question, David Littlejohn's answer. It was a concern I had that footfall is a very rough measure of how successful a town is. So I'm just wondering if you could expand on your thoughts as to, you mentioned spends related things. I wonder if you could expand on how you're thinking about measuring that going forward. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. For a long time, we have measured footfall, and I think it's an interesting figure, but it doesn't, of itself, as explained earlier, indicate what people are doing with their time. We actually use a series of kind of metrics around data gathering. We've got kind of consultancy work that we measure spend, and that creates a kind of model around how much we are, how much collectively we're spending in the city centre and on what purpose. We've also just recently, and it's being launched next week, I think, a retail study, which just looks at the whole retail picture across Perth and Kinross and identifies how much available spend is technically there. You know, it's one level. It's one thing having things for people to spend their money on. If people don't actually have that cash, that's another matter. So the retail impact study will just look at that notional capacity for spend. My colleague John McCrone is on the call, and he can possibly say a little bit more about the technicalities of the expenditure model that we use.
Morning, Convener, morning, members. Happy to provide further commentary on that. As David has said, footfall in itself is but one measure in terms of the flow of people, but ultimately capturing data on expenditure is more informative in relation to, one, what customers are spending their money on, and two, how that translates in terms of opportunity in relation to types of use. We are shortly, as David said, about to share that information from analysis from the retail group, which gives a overarching picture within the context of Perth and Kinross, so Perth and rural towns. In terms of ongoing evidence and data, we are about to recommission some of our data sources. Around that, we currently work with local providers in terms of use of the Perth card. That gives us a degree of information in relation to where people are coming from and what they are spending on. There's a significant growth in terms of providers around that, based on use of both mobile phone analysis within a defined area, and also card expenditure analysis. So we're about to commission work that will allow us to have more dynamic data sets around that on a more regular basis, which, one, will help us as a planning authority in terms of some of those uses and the spend in the high street and indeed other town centres, and two, sharing that with businesses to allow them understanding of markets and customer bases beyond what they themselves will have, to allow them to target more people and to promote that, to get more people coming in. So we will have more data sets which will allow us to then provide more information on what that expenditure looks like going forward.
Thank you. And I'll now move to Councillor Smith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question is on page 18 regarding the percentage of vacant retail units in Perth city centre. It's fairly common knowledge on social media that they keep commenting Perth is dead. There's so many empty vacant places. My question is that 10%, 10.5%, how do you calculate that when you consider some of the bigger retail shops have been closed and they can make up a huge area? So does it really reflect The size, the percentage? Thank you.
I'll ask John to give the kind of specific detail, but your point is well made.
Yeah, I mean that is a good point. Sorry, my mic seems to be doing strange things. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, thanks for the question. Vacant units are measured in two bases: one, either floor space, or two, number of units within a defined area. In terms of consistency with other broader comparative analysis across Scotland, we use a unit basis, and that is based on a regular site and analysis, as well as contact with agents to advise us if we haven't picked up on that. So we do it on a unit basis rather than a floor space basis. And that's really just the evidence base that we use, because we can compare it with others. We do also monitor floor space, and again, you will see that as part of that work that is coming through from the work that we commission with retail groups. So it's consistency of approach really is why we do it, so we can compare with others. But we do have the other information. Happy to share that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on page 91 of the pack, and the top indicator there, which says the percentage of residential and business premises with access to next generation broadband, and it states our current performance was 88.3 last year, and our target is 100%. Now, obviously, I realise that 100% is a laudable ambition, but we all know from the problems of the Scottish Government R100 scheme how difficult it is to connect the small but challenging last sort of 5 or 10% of premises to broadband. And I just wonder if we're making ourselves a bit of a hostage to fortune by having a 100% target for at the moment. Thank you.
The 100% target is there because that's the Scottish Government's stated target to give every residential property access to next generation broadband. Again, this is a bit like the footfall target, as one that we're considering for future years. We can't directly influence the delivery of that target, and therefore there's a question about whether or not it should be reflected in our performance indicators. So it's a national target. We're currently 88.3%. The stated target is 100% coverage. You're absolutely correct in terms of what happens for those very difficult to connect houses. As things stand, it's the government's responsibility to find a solution for those individual properties. We can influence, so we lobby, we influence. I take part in a kind of a monthly meeting with colleagues from Digital Scotland, and we can set out our continuing concerns about the not spots that are still across the area. But the target is the national target.
Sorry, thank you. I do accept that, you know, obviously it is a Scottish Government target, and perhaps we do need to kind of review its inclusion in the performance indicators. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now take Councillor Kigali, and then I'll take the 3 second questions and then bring questions to a close. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask whether we've got any further information on the data about satisfaction with local leisure facilities, which has seen what seems to be quite a large drop from 74% in 2020 to 2021 to 58% last year. Obviously missing his target by quite a bit. That jumps out as, you know, quite an area of concern. So if we could have some information on, number one, whether we know why that was, and then number two, whether we have a proper plan of rectifying it, that'd be helpful.
Again, if none of my kind of colleagues from that particular service are in the meeting, I'll need to get back to you, Councillor Kigali, with that information, but I've taken a note of it, so we'll get a response back out.
Councillor Lang.
It actually states in the report that the 2 main reasons for the fall are the lack of parking at Bell Sports Centre, which we're looking to address, and perceived lack of cleanliness at Perth Leisure Pool. So it says there are the two main reasons in the drop. So there will be action taken by Live Active Leisure. It's also down to the age and condition of Perth Leisure Pool as it is just now, and that's why we're having a review of our leisure facilities. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I thought you were convening the meeting today, not Councillor Ling, but clearly not.
Councillor Forbes, thank you for that comment. I'm happy to take the lead of the council to make comment if I choose. Please proceed.
Indeed, you are the convener. Thank you very much. Page 95, I want to ask a question on municipal waste collected that's recycled or composted, and there's quite a significant jump in the target. If you'll know this better than me, convener, but as I understand it, had the deposit return scheme gone ahead, then that would have had a downward effect on our recycling rates. I presume at the time this was written, we didn't know the deposit return scheme was going to be abandoned. So have I got that right, the right way around, or have I got it wrong? And if so, why are we expecting such a big jump?
Mark, can you please take that question?
Yeah. Thanks, convener. Thanks for the question, Councillor Forbes. I think similar to the answers that David gave earlier, that 65% target is the Scottish Government target. So it's not necessarily something that we feel that we will be able to achieve, but it's certainly something that's been set for us, and that's been in place now for a number of years. Obviously, we do all we can, and we're making a number of changes to our service to improve recycling. But certainly, it's not our it wasn't our expectation that we would achieve that 65%. And in fact, I don't think any local authority in Scotland has actually achieved it either. Maybe one or two, but it certainly wasn't a local target which we set for ourselves.
Thank you. Content. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. On the same page, on page 95, I'm looking at emissions from council properties. In 2020, we had 10,000. 2021, we had 10.7 thousand. I'm wondering why, when we're trying to reduce emissions, we had a target of 13,000 for 2023, yet, thankfully, it was only 9,000. Can we have some information on that, please?
Thank you. Mark, are you able to comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think that's probably more for our colleagues in property in terms of that target. It's certainly not something which is within my remit, but I can certainly go away and speak to colleagues and get a note back to elected members.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith, your second question.
Thank you very much, convener. My question is on page 18. It's regarding the number of unemployed people supported into work as a result of employability programmes supported by the Housing and Environment Service. It has got NA, and the target is 500. Surely we should have, maybe with the way things are at the moment with vacancies, we should have maybe an up-to-date sort of idea how it's going. Thank you.
And there is, I think there's an explanation in the text in terms of the availability. It's a point in time when we've got the information. That data doesn't come through. I think it's until July, so that's why we don't have that.
Thank you. And you came in after my comment, Councillor Duff, but your question I'll take. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is with regards to page 78. At the foot of the left-hand column, there's a comment about Business Gateway contractor elevator. I do remember sitting on a briefing session to do with elevator and finding I was very impressed actually with the impact on sustainable business success that it had. I just wondered if we are still working with elevator and if we have continued to work or expanding our work with elevator. Thank you.
Yes, elevator fulfill two roles. They are the business gateway contractor for Perth and Kinross, Angus and Dundee. And then separately, they deliver a range of business support programmes for us. Effectively, they win tenders to do that work for us. So yes, we are continuing to work with Elevator.
Thank you. That brings questions to a close, and I will now move the report. The paper before us this morning is the Community's Annual Performance Report for 22-23. As has been noted, this is a high-level summary which looks at activity across the whole of that very wide and disparate service. To contain all that has happened over the last year in a limited number of pages has, I'm sure, proved as challenging as in previous years. We have considered the performance data and the targets this morning. However, it is important that we also consider the many outcomes for people who use our services. As such, I thought it would be helpful to expand on a couple of areas to illustrate what support from the Council, our officers and partnership working can do. In conjunction with industry leaders Code Clan, we ran a 4-week intensive introduction to software and coding skills course at the Creative Exchange in Perth during March 2023. Students aged 16 to 24 learned the basics of coding and web development, including HTML, CSS and JavaScript. It culminated in a project to develop a website using the skills gained. Students also received insights from local tech businesses into the career opportunities in the digital sector. This was a fully funded course supported by Perth and Kinross Council and the Tay Cities Digital Skills Project. In conjunction with industry leaders, Code Clan, we ran a 4-week intensive introduction to software and coding skills course at the Creative Exchange in Perth during March 23. Sorry, there's double text here. It culminated in a project to develop a website using the skills gained. Students also received insights from local tech businesses into the career opportunities in the digital sector. A total of 8 students from across the Tay Cities region started the course, with 6 completing the full 4 weeks. All enjoyed the course and are looking to utilise their skills going forward, with a number looking to sign up to appropriate college or university courses in the autumn. However, it is hoped that further courses will run and attract a larger interest going forward. This might be a small number, but the opportunities that such a course has provided for these young people, all of whom would not have been able to pay to go on such a course, will be immeasurable. It also brings much needed skills to the area. In a similar vein, 23 to 31 South Methven Street was a prominent block within Perth City Centre Conservation Area, which includes the B-listed former bank which faces onto the High Street in St Paul's Square. Initially, the vacant property development team were approached by a local developer in 2016 regarding support for the redevelopment of the property. The project was approached in 3 phases, with parts of the property vacant between 6 months and 4 years prior to reoccupation. Significant work had to be undertaken during each phase to adapt the former bank for its specialised new tenants. Relocation of Perth Dental Practice to the ground floor of the modern section of the property, establishment of new opticians to Perth within the ground floor of the modern section, establishing Specialist Dental Training Academy and Adult Ortho Centre within the listed building, requiring stonework and window restoration and specialist 3-floor internal fit-out. Supported throughout by the vacant property team, this project presents a strong case study for support of disused commercial building adaptation to find new modern uses which deliver sustainable economic development, diversifying and rebalancing the economic sectors within this area. The project has brought approximately 900 square metres of disused commercial space back into use, whilst directly creating 32 high-skilled jobs. These 2 case studies could be supported by many more, but they illustrate to me the impact that the Council can make to one of our key priorities and a key focus of this committee, developing a resilient, stronger and greener local economy. I'm sure that you want to join me in offering our thanks to all of the staff across the community service who work hard every day to make a difference. I'm happy to move this paper and I call on Bailey Williamson to second the report. Thank you.
Happy to second, convener.
Thank you very much. Do members have any comments on this report? I see none. Sorry, Councillor Lang.
Thanks, convener. My technology has failed me, or maybe my ability to use the technology has failed me. I'd just like to comment. I wasn't trying to convene the meeting. It was just to save officers to go away to respond to Councillor Kigali when the answer was in the paper. I was just pointing them to it. So that was just trying to help out there. I welcome this report. I do find, and I've always said this through the 11 years of being here, that the figures within have to be taken with a pinch of salt because they're a moment of time, and the targets that we set are either set as too high and we're chastised for that, or too low and we as a council are chastised for that, and that's hammed all the way through. But I think I'm more interested in the outcomes that we have for our residents, and their information and feedback is the most worthwhile part of this. But I'd like to thank the officers for pulling this all together and showing us the direction of travel, and it can highlight areas of real concern that we can maybe as a council address moving forward the next year or two. So thanks to all the officers for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Convener. It's not a surprise to me for me to say that I agree with a lot of the comments you've just made in relation to the work the staff have done on this. It is a bit of a surprise for me to now also agree with Councillor Laing. This is a snapshot of a moment in time, and he's right. Some of the numbers will have gone up the way and some of the numbers will have gone down the way. And I just want to put on record my thanks and the thanks for our group, for all of the staff, and hopefully David can take this back. We are genuinely very lucky here at Perth and Kinross that we have a good bunch of staff, and you know, people moan about the staff at the council regularly to all of us, I'm quite sure, and I always use the phrase that the vast majority of people come into work to do the very best they possibly can and go home at night to their families. I think that's just the way it is, and we should be grateful to them for that. David's been open about the areas where we've fallen short, and I agree with him. It's definitely not lack of anything. That they're certainly not lacking in commitment or care for the constituents that we all represent. And I know, Convener, I was slightly critical right at the start of the meeting about the situation in Invergowrie. It is very frustrating, but I do know that the issue doesn't lie with the staff at Perth and Kinross Council. I know that they've been tied up doing work as instructed by the Scottish Government, and that isn't a political point before Councillor Laing wants to come back on it. It is just a fact of life. And onto the targets on footfall, you know, David and I will probably disagree on this. I believe if we get people into the town and get them walking around, they will ultimately spend some money. How much of it they'll spend in which shop, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area. Want to pick up on some of the things that we've done particularly well on. I'm sure, Convener, you won't be at all surprised that I'm going to mention roads. You know, the improvement of 6.4% is very welcome, and I think it shows that if you have political commitment and finance, you can achieve it, and I really hope that we continue to see that improvement under your leadership of this administration. The stick to the six, I've said this before, I was given a huge amount of criticism when we started that. Sad to say, from some people within this room. The team persuaded me that it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad that they did, because clearly it was the right thing to do. There was also criticism of the Open for Business Fund, but that's been very well received and it has made a difference to small businesses. I'm not going to finish on my favourite topic of play parks, but I am delighted to see that there is some progress there. I think we can all agree surely now that in 3 years' time we will not have a brand new play park in every part of Perth and Kinross, but we'll revisit that at some point in the future. And on a practical level, David, perhaps I can suggest that where targets are specifically set by the Scottish Government or some other outside body, and where we have absolutely no control over them, could that be identified in future reports? Because it seems unfair that we're criticised when actually we cannot influence those outcomes whatsoever. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forbes. I'm sure we can pick up particularly on that point in terms of identifying Scottish Government targets. And thank you for your positive comments. Thank you. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. I may be shorter than Councillor Forbes. I would just like to thank all who have been involved in compiling this paper. It is providing, in my view, a very positive story for Perth and Perth and Kinross. And yes, like anything, there's always challenges. We're still post-COVID. These figures and results are strong, and it reflects dedicated work from our officers and teams. So I very much congratulate them. I look forward to the changes that the opening of the museum will bring to the centre of Perth, and the positivity and the extending our USP of our cultural offering, which will really be a great asset going forward for Perth and our economic future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. I wasn't going to ask questions or make a comment on this report, as I'm it's coming to Scrutiny and Performance Committee next Wednesday as well. But just to pick up on Councillor Forbes's point, for future plans, so I think we've got the corporate delivery improvement plan coming forward. I think it is important to recognise what our statutory targets and what are statutory parameters for us to measure, but also for Perth and Kinross Council to choose and look to set its own targets. So if there is a statutory target, do we actually want to beat that statutory target by 5%? If there's a statutory measure in place, do we want to put our own additional measures in place in respect of other parameters, things that we, the elected members of Perth and Kinross Council, want to see for our residents, rather than what the Scottish Government or whichever other body wants to see us delivering, in terms of performance. It's important for us to add on and scrutinise properly what the appropriate performance measures and appropriate performance levels for our residents, the ones that we represent, to determine what those are.
Thank you, Arch. I think you make some good points there. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. I'm just going to finish very quickly in thanking the officers very much. But one thing I have noticed, which I'd love to see in the future, is look up at the screen and look how colourful Perth is. Maybe in the future we could maybe Perth look like a bit like Perth look like that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'm sure that planning colleagues may have some views on the colour palette that you're suggesting, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you. Can we agree this report? Thank you, Arch. We now move to item 7, the short-term let control area proposals for consultation, and I will ask Ben Wilson to introduce this report. Thank you.
Good morning. So this report seeks approval to consult on two things. One, the principle of establishing a short-term let control area in part of Perth and Kinross, and separately a consultative draft non-statutory planning guideline to be used when considering planning applications for material change of use to short-term lets across Perth and Kinross, regardless of whether there's a short-term let control area. This arises from a number of things: council priorities, recent changes to national legislation and policy, community concern about the impact of short-term lets on local housing markets, and that's expressed in the local housing strategies and action to bring forward this work, and also an objective of achieving a balanced approach to this issue of housing markets, and also the economy and the importance of short-term lets to support tourism and local economy. The report consists of cover, 3 appendices: the evidence paper, which we think provides justification for the control area, consulting on it this time, the draft consultative guideline, and the 3rd appendix is a more detailed map showing the proposed extent of the area. If approved, we would then carry out extensive non-statutory consultation with communities, with the tourism sector and the self-catering industry body. We'd consider responses, consider that in light of evidence as well, make a report back to this committee, and at that point, procedurally with the opportunity to proceed to formally announce a notice to designate a control area, and there's further response opportunity at that time for the public, and then it would go into a statutory process with Scottish ministers. I'm happy to take any questions. Also on the call and teams are 2 of the officers that worked on this, Stephanie Downing and Katrina Walker. That's all.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions with regard to this report? Councillor Smith.
Yeah. Thank you, Convener. Could you tell me how many short let there are currently at the moment in this area, please? How many short lets are there? Thank you.
Apologies. We don't know. This relates to material changes of use to short-term let in planning terms. So it doesn't mean if somebody uses Airbnb or a similar platform, it doesn't automatically mean that's a short-term let for planning purposes. And part of the effect of establishing a control area would mean that any short-term let would count as a material change of use and would then need planning permission.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. I'm just interested to know how many houses have been sold in the proposed control area in the last 5 years, or any period that you might have data for, and what was the average value? Thank you.
We don't have that data to hand. We can track through Registers of Scotland sales of houses, and therefore the value is there. But that would be a significant piece of work to try and understand the overall sales pattern, if you like. I'm not sure what's lying behind the questions. You might need to kind of.
I'm trying to get a handle on affordable housing.
Ben can probably say something on affordable housing in particular. That is trackable.
Yes, so Appendix 1, the evidence paper at page 4 sets out some information on affordable housing, affordability of housing, and medium and average house prices at Perth and Kinross geography.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah. Given that we don't know how many short-term lets there are in Perth and Kinross, I'm just wondering, are we not a bit premature here in terms of that people have to register their properties by the end of October? And we've selected Highland and we've selected Eastern Perthshire as areas where we want these short-term let areas. But what happens if, say, a community like, I don't know, I'll just pick one at random, Blaringon, turns out to have 40% of the houses are short-term let. Do we then have to start that process again? And the one that started it seems a bit messy not to know where the things are before we introduce the zones.
We felt we wanted to start somewhere because there is clearly an issue in enabling local people to access houses in particular parts of the council area, and we've used the evidence of second homes, and you can see from the map that in certain parts of the area there is a significant proportion of the housing stock are second homes. It's up to 38% in around Kenmore, for example. That is way above what would normally be deemed to be a kind of average proportion of second homes in the area. That figure also correlates with the number of second home owners that have registered to pay business rates. So you can make a direct assumption that if people have opted to register for business rates and arguably not pay business rates because they're benefiting from the small business bonus, that they're doing that because they're using their property for a commercial let. So we think we've got a sufficiently robust evidence base at present to say where there are very high proportions of second homeowners, you can make a reasonable assumption that a large proportion of those are being used commercially for short-term let, and that evidence is backed up by the proportion of businesses in those areas that are registered for rates. You're absolutely right to say that it's not a definitive. The only definitive way of knowing how many second homes are rented out commercially is once the licensing scheme comes into play. But I think we're trying to make the case here that we believe, based on those data that we have access to, that there is a reasonable case to designate a short-term let control area. Your second question was about what happens if other areas transpire that the proportion is higher. The options are twofold. One is to extend the control area in those areas, and that would require a process to be gone through, or it's to pursue planning applications. Because remember, at present, if anyone with a second home is not using it principally for their own use, that could be a material change of use, and those property owners should be applying for planning permission. There are a number of applications actually flowing in. We've seen a significant increase in the number of people applying for planning permission for change of use because they are aware of potential legislative change. So all that happens in the control area is that the choice of an owner as to whether or not they think it's a material change of use or not is kind of taken away. And the assumption is that all properties that are used for short-term let will require planning permission. So that already, we pursue planning applications elsewhere, and if an area, a community, Blair and Gone, if we received complaints that the number of second homes are being let out as short-term lets was causing an issue in planning terms, we could pursue applications or ultimately enforcement. So in planning terms, the real change is taking away the choice of a property owner as to whether they think what they're doing is a material change of use. We're saying, well, it doesn't really matter. All use of properties for short-term let will be deemed a material change of use, and you will require to apply for planning consent. So that's what the consultation is about. I suppose, bearing in mind this is a consultation launch, it's not changing anything at this stage. It's to ask the views out there, and I think the report has tried to get across. There is a balance. There absolutely is a balance in terms of how we approach this, but we think the evidence is there at this juncture to at least begin the consultation process. Over the summer and into the autumn, more people will apply for licenses, and that will strengthen the database, the data set that we have. But at the moment, we don't believe we need to wait until all properties are licensed to justify launching a consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. It's a question for David. Thanks for the paper. It's a very comprehensive paper, and I've almost enjoyed reading it. I've got a small question on section. I'm joking, obviously. A small section on section 4.3. There's a quotation there. However, short-term lets are also an important part of the visitor economy, encouraging spend locally. That's an area where I think it might be worth quantifying that going forward, because I've read other surveys from other parts of the UK where that anecdotal evidence isn't carried forward. They think there's a lot of money, but in some places it's a very small amount of money. So I would encourage that type of research to be done going forward. Thanks.
I'm just checking there's a question in there somewhere. Yes, as time goes on, we can harden the data, and that's partly what the consultation is about. If people come back and say you're completely barking up the wrong tree, we value short-term lets in our community because those owners are spending vast amounts of money, then that's a view, and that's part of the evidence base. But our belief at the moment is there is a balance, but on balance, the balance is wrong.
Okay, sorry, thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Convener, would you permit me a very quick follow-up to something David said before I move into my question?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. David, you talked a lot about second homes. Can I just get this clear for me and I think for everybody else? This policy, if it goes ahead, will not impact on second homes at all.
That's correct, unless the reason that someone principally has a second home is to cover its full costs by letting it out commercially, and if they are unable to secure planning consent for that change of use, that of itself means they decide to sell. That would be the logical conclusion of that. If I may, just to kind of expand, I think the paper hopefully makes it clear. The introduction of a short-term let control area of itself will have a limited impact on availability of housing to meet local need. It's a tool in the toolkit, but there are other mechanisms there, not least of all, changes to the council tax regime for second homeowners, and indeed building more affordable houses. All of that together is part of the solution. I think the challenge, particularly in Highland Perthshire and parts of Eastern Perthshire, is the amount of land available to build large numbers of new affordable homes is challenging. We struggle to find sites, and therefore we need to have a wider set of tools in the toolkit, which would include looking at, ultimately, when legislation changes, matter for council, that the council tax regime, but also in the interim, trying to just restrict the number of new second homes that are being used as short-term lets.
Thanks, David. I'm going to very respectfully disagree with you because I don't think the paper makes it clear. I think the paper amalgamates second homes, short-term lets as individual properties, and also includes units, which I understand now to be lodge type accommodation. And I think there's a real risk that we're looking at a very large number, and actually we can only control a very small part of that. But I'll come back to that at a later stage in the debate. My question specifically for you today is, there's reference made to a scheme run by Highland Council, which is a sensible thing to do. It's literally across the boundary from us. Can you confirm, is it true that they misinterpreted the Scottish Government's guidelines and have therefore had to pause their plans?
But Ben may have more information. I'm not aware of that. And the Highland Council consulted a year ago on designating the Badenoch and Strathspey area as a short-term let, and they were the second part of Scotland to do that. Edinburgh has one in place already for the whole city council area. Fife Council is currently considering designating short-term lets in certain geographies within the Fife Council area. But if he knows, we.
Sorry, I don't have anything to add. Sorry, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Councillor Kugali.
Yeah, I'd just say, just from listening to what we've heard so far and reading, it does feel like there's a little bit of hit and hope here, and we're kind of relying on the assumption this is just going to miraculously work. And it would make me a lot more comfortable, initially, if we were waiting till October so we had an actual idea of the numbers rather than guessing. But I'd also then follow that up with the actual question, which is, do we have any actual, data or proper idea of what this will do to house prices? Or again, is this just a bit of a hit and hope and we're kind of, guessing it's going to work?
The principal purpose of this is not to alter house prices. It's to make sure that those properties that are being used as short-term lets are appropriately used for that purpose in planning terms. So the draft supplementary guidance, for example, gives some indications of where it might not be appropriate for a property to be used as a short-term let. For example, if it's a flat in a tenement, or a flat in a building that doesn't have its own door, because those properties are more likely to be affordable and are more likely to be available for local people. And equally, in those buildings, there is more likely to be a chance of antisocial behaviour. We do receive complaints about short-term lets, and there are certain hotspots, if you like. And bear in mind that our evidence base is based again on the number of properties that are registered to pay business rates. I see no reason why a second homeowner would be applying for business rates, therefore renting out their property for more than 70 nights a year, if they weren't doing that on a commercial basis. So the point about waiting till October, yeah, that is a valid point of view.
Thank you. Bailey.
Thank you. While listening to the questions from this end of the chamber, I did a tiny bit of research myself and just run these figures past officers to see if there's something that officers recognise. I'm looking on the short-term let site Verbo at the moment and just searching Aberfeldy, Kenmore and Grantully. and the indication is there that there are close to 500 holiday units available for rent. I've also looked, and the Guardian did research in specific Kenmore and Rannoch area and concluded that around about 36 in 100, so more than a third of properties are either second homes or a holiday let. Are those the regions of numbers that officers would recognise, even though you don't have hard figures, because we can't get hard figures? Thank you.
Ben can answer that. He's got some of the data. Yeah.
So Appendix 1, the evidence paper, does include information taken from Airbnb last year, and at a Perth and Ross level. The thing is, properties might be on for only a few weeks of a year, very light use of the whatever platform it is for short-term lets, or it might be on a commercial basis. There's links in the report to the statutory definition of what counts as a material change of use, which has evolved over time. So we can't rely upon just looking at the platforms, and I believe also the Guardian's research pretty much did that as well. We cannot rely upon that when we're looking at what would count as a material change of use for planning purposes. That's why we've, for this evidence paper, used the valuation board data on second homes and self-catering units. That gives us something firmer to use as proxy data at this point, and that we think that's sufficient to do this non-statutory consultation at this point in time before then reporting back on an actual formal designation, which, as I indicated earlier, would also then have to get published and people have an opportunity to make representations.
Thank you. And I now move to Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. I think my question I had has been asked and answered, but just in relation to what Ben had to say there, I just wonder, I know in the past various groups have tried to calculate percentages of holiday lets within towns and use these kind of platforms that Bailey was referring to, but I think there's a distinct degree of potential for double counting, because these premises won't just advertise on the one platform, and I take it that in terms of that kind of data analysis there hasn't been any cross-checking to see if there's been any double or triple counting or whatever when we do these kind of analysis of data.
That's also why I'm not relying upon using the platform's own data. The figures it's the colourful tables in Appendix 1, the rows near the top, self-catering units, second homes. What we're using as proxies, those do not have double counting, so that's why they're more reliable, and absolutely that risk of platforms is why we've not been able to rely upon that.
Thank you. I now move to Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. A couple of questions on the evidence paper, page 125 of the document pack. We've got the map of key indicator, which has the percentages ranging from 24.5% in that top part of Eastern Perthshire over to 38.4% in an area which I assume is Kinloch Rannoch or somewhere like that. But we don't know how long those percentages have existed, do we? So we don't know what the change is. So in order to look at change, do we then have to go to the charts on housing, Perthshire, Highland Perthshire housing on the different housing market areas? And am I right in interpreting these charts to mean that the number of house completions exceeds the self-catering units and second homes change in all of them except for Kinloch Rannoch, which is sort of marginal as to be statistically non-significant?
Yes, but Ben can elaborate if that's helpful.
apologies, are you referring to percentage changes or absolute numbers over the time? So, for example, the table on page 6, which shows the last 5 years. So there's a total housing completion figure for all of Perth and Kinross of 3,500 or 3,508, and you're comparing that to the self-catering above in the column, the self-catering units and the second homes. Is that? I think I'm understanding you correctly. Yes, that. Oh, yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. So I think what we take from that is that that more houses are getting completed in those areas than that there are properties becoming self-catering units or second homes. What was the basis of the challenge to Edinburgh's short-term let control area?
Well, it's a judicial review raised by some owners of self-catering properties because the council took an entire council area approach. So whereas we've looked at Perth and Kinross and identified those areas where there's a higher concentration of second homes and then correlated that with those paying the non-domestic rates and concluded there is an issue in Highland Perthshire, Eastern Perthshire. What Edinburgh did was simply designate the whole council area as a short-term let, and that's, there's a high concentration in the new, hugely high concentrations in the new town and the old town, but they took the view that because of the scale of Edinburgh and its compactness, people would simply, the donut effect, self-catering and short-term lets just move out to the periphery. So to pick that up and prevent more properties becoming short-term lets, they just designated the whole council area, but they didn't have, I think the case is based, it's predicated in the view that they didn't have sufficiently robust evidence to justify creating that control area in the periphery parts of Edinburgh.
Thank you. Leader of the Council.
Thanks, Convener. I think here again we are arguing over statistics in front of us that can be taken in many ways. Councillor Stewart's point that maybe more houses have been built than have gone into the rental market or the short-term let market could be true. But if you look at these single one-off houses in the area that I live in, they're 4 or 5 bedroom. They're not, I'm talking about communities here and affordable for community houses. So to get a complete analysis, you'd have to look how many affordable houses that could be moved, because a lot of people who are renting houses in these areas are being moved out and then they're being done at short-term lets. I think people are talking here, looking at figures. Maybe they want to come up and visit Dunkeld, come and speak to the people in Dunkeld. I'll listen to the residents, I'll listen to the communities who are having to move out of these areas because people are moving up, quite rightly, retiring up here. That's fantastic. But we're taking away housing stock. Second, ex-council houses are now being bought up at 50 to 100,000 over the market value that no local person can bid for, and they've been turned into a holiday let because people can get, instead of renting some now at £600 a week, they're renting now £600 a month, they're £150 a night. And my question is, David was asked 2 years ago, I think, I asked him to come up to Dunkeld because at that time the administration and the officers didn't see that there was a problem about short-term lets in Perth and Kinross because they averaged it, again using figures, across the whole of Perth and Kinross instead of using data that you can see in the Guardian article that they put out. So David quite went up and had a chat. David, did you go up and speak to people who are actually living through it, and what was the feeling of the people that were actually living in the area and living through this?
The answer is yes, I did. I did visit. I did have also the meeting with Dunkeld and Burnham Community Council, and that was an open meeting where there was a much wider audience there than there would have been normally had I not been appearing. And I would certainly say the majority of comments were about the impact of short-term lets on the local community. To be balanced, there were a few people did recognise that there is a financial benefit short-term let owners were eating locally, shopping locally. Sorry, the guests of short-term let owners were eating and shopping locally, but I would think it'd be fair to say the overwhelming view of that particular group, which might have been self-selecting, was that it was not a great outcome, particularly for younger people in that area.
Thank you. I'll now move to the second questions and take the second questions there are now from Councillor Smith first, followed by Councillors Allen, Forbes, Kugali, and finally Councillor Duff.
Thank you very much, Convener. We all know the problem here is the shortage of affordable homes. How many houses currently in Perth and Kinross are we satisfied that are available? Okay, possibly empty. Okay, and are we satisfied that we're pursuing every opportunity to bring these empty houses back into use? Has that been followed up a lot? I mean, there's got to be areas there where we'd open it up. Thank you.
There's kind of two tax, I suppose. Empty properties, there's already a council tax supplement on those. That's a disincentive to owners of properties to keep them empty. We've also got within our business in place team kind of 2 dedicated vacant property officers who work with owners of vacant properties to try and find a way to bring them back into use. We can do that by a combination of carrots and sticks, if you like. So we're using combinations of planning legislation and building standards legislation, environmental health. We're offering grants, feasibility to try and find a way to get those properties back into use. And we've been pretty successful in doing that. We've also taken further action where it's not working. So, the decision to pursue the compulsory purchase order on the property in Scone to get that property out of its state and release it back onto the market. So there's a variety of tools that we use. But I think, as I said earlier on, there's no one solution. It is a combination of freeing up some second homes and short-term lets. It's a combination of building more where we can. It's a combination of the council continuing with its own social housing programme. It's a combination of disincentivizing people to keep properties vacant. So I think there's a range of tools, but we actively pursue it, and there are a couple of colleagues whose job it is to find solutions to vacant property.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, your second question.
Thank you, Convener. In the report, there's reference to 600 houses being affected by this proposal and thus requiring planning applications or certificate of lawfulness. But there's the planning applications in particular. My question is, how many of those would be deemed as affordable using the Scottish Government's definition of affordable housing? And are the planners confident that they can cope with that level of extra work? Thank you.
I'll let Ben answer both those questions, I think.
I do apologise. This is did you hear the first part of my answer? We don't know in terms of what the composition of the 600 or so estimate is, and it is very much an estimate. In the annex to the cover report, section 2.2 describes workforce implications of introducing a short-term let control area. That was something which was managed, monitored and managed, but at this stage we do not anticipate it would require any more staffing. And further up in the body of the report itself, at table 1 or paragraph 611, there is something showing a snapshot of how many planning applications have come in. It's just over 50 so far at different stages. So yes, there'll be a workload implication, but in terms of efficiencies, we think it'll be manageable, but we will monitor that.
Thank you. I move now to Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. Page 124 tells us 72% of newly registered self-catering units could come from purpose-built self-catering units applications. I understand that this proposal would not influence that at all. So does that mean that we actually can only control 22%?
Well, you can do the maths quicker than I can. I'm not on the right page, but yes, we can only control, we can control all of it through the planning system, but we need to be clear. I'm not suggesting that every single application for a short-term let or a self-catering unit will be refused planning permission. I think we need to kind of be clear that particularly bespoke and purpose-built units absolutely have a place in supporting the visitor economy. They're unlikely to be well, they won't be if they're a purpose-built cluster or resort. They're not going to be removing housing from the local housing market. And if you go to rent a unit in a complex, you're not going to be complaining about noise because you wouldn't have chosen to go there if you had wanted complete seclusion. So the purpose-built market, I think, is absolutely fine, and we have consented quite a lot of those in recent months. And the committee has the Planning and Placemaking Committee has consented a number of bespoke developments. What we're focusing on are trying to limit the number of new short-term lets that are coming into the market, and over time, with a combination of that and other policies, reduce the number of second homes in the area that could otherwise be used for local housing need. We can't force people to sell their houses. We can possibly, if the council's minded to, penalise by doubling the council tax, for example, but that's a kind of separate argument. We are looking principally to regularise the market should these properties require planning permission or not, and that allows people to submit their representations. It allows committees to consider the merits of those properties. Right.
That was a straightforward question. He answered it. Sorry.
Richard Machines. Councillor Kigali.
Is mine on now? Terrific. I'm going to find myself agreeing with Councillor Lang for a moment about the issue about house prices rising. That's an issue across the whole of the UK. But I'd just like to have a bit of clarity here about what the actual priorities are, because the response to my first question was essentially to disregard the issue on house prices, and that isn't the priority. But now the leader of the council is bringing it back in. And if that's the priority, which, across the country, it needs to be something important, surely the better solution there is to focus on house building rather than, trying to pick up a few extra properties here and there. And it just seems like the priorities here are a little bit muddied, and a bit of clarity on that would be helpful.
From a planning perspective, it's not about altering house prices. That might be a consequence if more second homes come back onto the market in a local area. The price may fall, but that's not the principal purpose of this consultation. It's to look at bringing in some planning control so that the local authority, as planning authority, is able to monitor and put appropriate conditions if they are minded to grant consent, or in some cases take the view we shouldn't be granting planning permission for change of use. So it's absolutely about appropriate land use and impact on local amenity. That's the driver for doing this, but there may well be unintended or consequential impacts in terms of house price. So I'm very clear on that. That's the purpose of this consultation.
Thank you. A point of clarity from Councillor Lang.
Yes, I just think that Councillor Kigali unintentionally misinterpreted what I meant by the fact that we have so many people are buying houses purely to put on the short-term let issue. That is forcing the price up. So it's the short-term, we have a market rate and a level market playing field, which is inflated in places like Dunkeld. And I'm only talking about Dunkeld here. And there, because I live there, and I noticed that there's only 4 councillors here who are from the wards that are included with this short-term let control zone proposition. We are living there every day. We're not looking at figures and working across board. So the clarity was the effect on house price, not only on short-term lets, on what they're having buying to use as short-term lets.
Thank you. Councillor Duff, your second question, and then we'll conclude questions with Councillor Stewart, Councillor Allen briefly, and Councillor Welch. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to double check in terms of the questions and answers we've had today. Once the registration process is complete in October, I think if I'm right, will we have a more accurate picture of the number, type, size and location of short-term let properties across Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Yes, in the sense that by October, it's a requirement for all commercial short-term lets to have registered. I mean, there undoubtedly will be people who have not registered for whatever reason, but yes, October is the cut-off date after which there'll be a period of kind of collation and understanding what that means. But yes, factually, registration is the obvious way to get an absolute accurate number.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. One concern that had been expressed to me by the Provost was about the lack of allocation of sufficient land in LDP2 in the Highland Ward for housing projects. So just wondered if that was an issue. Is that Mr. Littlejohn something that you would agree with? And how many affordable or social housing completions have we had, if any, funded by, for example, the developer contributions for the housing market area by the council in the last 5 years, if any?
There are limited numbers of currently allocated houses in LDP2 because they were under the previous system where landowners proposed sites and then we would evaluate them against their suitability for housing. There is simply an undersupply of land in Highland Perthshire in particular, not exclusively, but large estates cover a significant part of the area. And we have struggled, I think, over the years to find suitable houses for larger scale housing developments, private sector developments, and therefore 25% of the delivery being affordable. Without significant amounts of new private sector houses, we are going to limit the number of affordable houses being made available, because through the planning system and that obligation that the majority of affordable houses are provided. If we take that largely out of the equation, we are down to small numbers of affordable houses being completed through the planning route, and the rest is therefore down to councils and RSLs through their own social housing programmes. But speaking to housing colleagues, I mean, again, we struggle to find sites for social housing across particularly Highland Perthshire. So we will look again at LDP3, but we can't magic up available housing sites, and therefore looking at how the existing housing stock is used is part of the solution.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. In the report, the term proxy data is used. I just wonder, what does that actually mean?
Well, I think that's what we explained. We looked at the valuation board and the number of properties that were registered to pay business rates. You have to be letting out your property for currently, the threshold has been looked at for more than 70 nights a year in order to be eligible to pay business rates. If you're therefore letting out your property for more than 70 nights a year and you're paying business rates, you can make a clear link back that those properties are being used for commercial short-term let, and that's the basis of the data that we use to arrive at our recommendations. Yes, absolutely. So these are second homeowners who have chosen, rather than pay council tax, they've chosen to register their property to pay business rates. Therefore, they believe they're running a business. And you're only eligible for business rates if you're renting out for more than 70 nights a year. So yes, it's accurate data. Is it as broad brush as accurate as the registration? Probably not, because there will be some people that are letting out their second homes that have continued to pay council tax, and these are the ones that we don't know who they are at present. But I think based on what we know from business rates, that's where we've arrived at those recommendations in the report.
Thank you, Arch. And the very last question, Councillor Welch.
This is following a comment from David in terms of looking to encourage purpose-built tourist accommodation. Without going into specific example, I've had correspondence from somebody within Ward 2 that's looking to effectively promote farm diversification in tourism with a number of options which he's bringing before planning officers, and is being given a very negative response through the application of NPF 4 and concerns around access to amenities and core paths or public transports. So this seems to be in conflict with our desire to bring forward additional holiday accommodation by private owners and potential businesses to seek to reduce the impact of for demand, and for example in areas like Dunkeld. It seems to be a conflict of policy, and I'd be interested to hear David's response to that.
It may be a conflict of policy in a specific location, in a specific set of circumstances. So beyond that, I couldn't comment, but there are other LDP policies that support farm diversification and tourism in rural areas, but it will come down to, and clearly it's not appropriate to go into the detail here. It will come down to the specific circumstances of that particular application in that particular location. I couldn't really comment any further on that, but we have LDP policies that are very supportive of tourism and rural diversification.
Work has been done to identify this, but you know, there are areas where it's you know, going to be difficult.
Thank you. I'll now move the report. This report asks the committee to agree to consult on the principle of introducing a short-term let control area for Highland Perthshire and part of Eastern Perthshire. This is where evidence indicates that short-term lets may be having an impact on the local housing markets. The responses to consultation will be reported back to this committee, where a decision on whether to proceed with the formal designation of a control area will be made. There would then follow a statutory process under the relevant regulations. This report also seeks approval for consultation purposes of a draft non-statutory planning guideline on short-term lets. Responses to that will also be reported back to this committee before final approval. I'm pleased to move this report and to allow consultation on this important initiative to commence. Can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Yes, I'm happy to second the report, convener. I believe that we are moving away from destination promotion to a destination management and how we better manage our tourism industry. I think we're seeing communities out there that are slowly losing their social vibrancy and their cultural identity. I believe that the problem has been exacerbated with second homes with the reduction in tax relief for buy-to-let mortgages that was introduced in 2015, but unfortunately not for tourist accommodation. And it's made the problem for second homes a lot worse as more and more people move into that sector. So I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you. And Councillor Forbes, I believe you wish to propose an amendment.
Thanks, Convener. I pre-submitted it to the committee services, so hopefully it can come up on the screen, and I'll allow a minute or two for people to read it, and I'll make some comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you wish to proceed with your explanation of the amendment? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I just wanted to make conscious there's quite a lot in there, so I wanted to make sure everyone had time to read it. So this document that we've seen today is bursting at the seams with data that's very complex and difficult for lay people like us to understand. But what it's lacking, in my opinion, is hard evidence. No one doubts the fact that there's a housing shortage, but nothing in this document tells us that this is the solution to that problem. So, Convener, what have we learned today? Well, we've learned that we don't know how many short-term lets there are in Perth and Kinross. We don't know how many houses this will bring back to the affordable housing market. We don't know how many houses have been sold in the proposed control area and what the average price was. We know the data is proxy data. The document includes second homes in the data, yet we know that this proposal can't influence them at all. And the document also agrees that short-term lets bring much more economical benefit to the economy than second homes do. We don't know what questions will be asked as part of the consultation or the way that they will be framed. Framing a question one way will incite a different answer to framing it another way. We don't know if our planning department can cope with the proposed increase in numbers. I'm going to mention a community which I won't actually identify. It is within Perth and Kinross, and I heard recently that they were complaining about the number of second homes. But when a local farmer came along and suggested they could perhaps build some houses on a field, they didn't want that either. But we know that housing development is linked to the ability for us to provide affordable homes. And as I said at the start, no one denies there's a shortage of housing, but this document doesn't tell us if the problem lies in the short-term let market. My feeling is that it doesn't, but that's a discussion for another day. This council has always prided itself on making decisions based on evidence. This document does not provide any evidence. Rather, it feels like a document that's been rushed through. And frankly, I'm at a loss as to understand why the administration can't leave this until October, when we will have more accurate data. And in fact, the document recognises this point on page 120. Convener, for some reason, you've either missed the lack of evidence at your pre-agenda meeting or chosen to push ahead despite the lack of evidence. And I know I've teased you in the past about not having any new initiatives to help the people of Perth and Kinross, and I hope this is not because of that. But surely you must understand why I'm questioning the timing of this and why it's been rushed through. My amendment is not about the principle of controlling short-term lets. It's about the fact that we may be about to make a decision based on poor data with little evidence, rushed through for some unknown reason. It's a simple amendment to delay this decision until we have a better and more accurate data to work with. You're proposing an emotional response to a problem that we don't yet understand, while a simple short delay can provide us with the evidence that we need. Anyone who votes against this amendment is abandoning any principle of making decisions based on evidence, and I would therefore encourage you to accept this amendment rather than go to the vote and save anyone who may be considering voting against it the embarrassment of doing so. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Do you have a seconder for your amendment? Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. We'll now take comment. Sorry, Councillor Cuthbert, please speak.
Thank you, convener. I take a slightly different spin from Councillor Forbes. In principle, I'm fully supportive of the concept of controlled areas. I think that we do need to do what we can to help areas that are inundated with incomers. I think that became clear at the planning committee meeting where we considered the Kenmore application where the community council objected. Their objection was much more about the fact that the place is becoming like a desert at certain times of year because of the numbers of people with second homes and short-term lets. So I'm not against the principle at all. My feeling is that the issue I have is that we're not giving the statistics time to come in, and what we might end up doing is missing communities. I gave the example of Blarington. I don't think there is an issue in Blarington, but it's really about other communities within Perth and Kinross. There could be one in, I don't know, Alyth, for example, where there is a high concentration, but we don't know that. So my feeling is that we're starting a consultation exercise in Highland and Eastern Perthshire, but not on these areas that may come out of the statistics. So my feeling is that we should be doing this in a planned way and actually looking at the statistics and then looking at where we should be putting these zones. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cuthbert. Bailey.
Thank you, convener. This is all about supply and demand. If we want more people to work in our businesses and boost our economy, they need somewhere to live. I'll not go into proto-capitalist arguments many times in this chamber, so hear me well. However, there is a certain undeniable logic to the idea that if you want workers to boost your economy, you have to provide them with an opportunity to acquire housing. It worked out pretty well for past industrialists. Look at the Lever brothers and the Cadbury family. We're still washing with their soap and eating their chocolate to this day. The evidence for the need for housing in these areas is stark. There are short-staffed hotels running at partial occupancy and limiting the people who can come to our area and the ones who will eat in the restaurants rather than cooking their own food in a holiday let. There's more value add. There's the shortage of staff that make childcare provision, medical services and social care difficult to sustain in these areas. There's the emails we as elected members get in our inbox each week from families in our overcrowded accommodation pleading for solutions. There's the operators of short-term lets who can't get staff to clean those very same short-term lets. I'll pause there. Yes, short-term lets are occupying the very properties that the people who service them would like to live in. I'll move on before this glitch in the matrix swallows us all. What we're talking about today is a consultation on an effective moratorium on further short-term lets in some areas. I'd go further, but for now I'll accept this as the start of many steps to hopefully make more housing available to local people at prices they can afford. Yes, we want to build more houses first. Yes, we need to build more houses too. That's undeniable, but it strikes me that the proposal before us today is a good start on the process of preventing more existing houses from changing to non-domiciliary usage. I'm completely at peace with the idea of making it slightly harder for person A to deprive person B of a house to live in their local area in the pursuit of a short-term profit. I suspect that supporters of this amendment today object to the policy in principle and that no amount of evidence will ever convince them. They are knowingly prolonging the ongoing housing and staffing crisis that is crippling the economies of our Highland and Eastern Perthshire communities. I strongly support solving that crisis and I'm happy to throw my full and most enthusiastic support behind the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. I'll now move to the Leader of the Council, Councillor Lang.
Thanks very much, convener. I wish this amendment from Councillor Forbes had followed the last one that he was going to bring a couple of weeks ago to council, and it didn't see the light of day because he was trying to amend some policy that we already had in place. But unfortunately, this one has come here today. It is very disappointing that in his time there was no action taken on gathering evidence or doing anything towards short-term lets and alleviating the housing shortage of residents in particularly in my area and the areas of other councillors who are elected members who are not here. There are only 4 of them here today. I cannot really agree with Councillor Cuthbert's assessment that it may happen somewhere else, so we won't do it where we know that there's a problem. It seems a strange way of looking at something. We'll kick it back, although we're fully aware that there's a problem in the areas that's designated for to be in this consultation. is a strange way to look at things. It's again, it seems to be a wrecking sort of amendment to push things back another 9 months, and then there'll be another reason to push it back. Now's the time to act. I stand with my residents on this one. I stand with the residents of Highland Perthshire, and if anybody who votes for the amendment wishes to come up and address some of the local communities, the housing community corporations that we have in Dunkeld and other areas, I'll welcome them. I'll set up a meeting and they can come along to Dunkeld and Burnham Community Council, and they may learn firsthand instead of looking from further afield at this problem. So I fully support the motion. I don't know if it even goes far enough, and hopefully we will move forward. But this is a good starting off point, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Point of clarification, Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks very much, Convener. It was just to check quickly, in terms of the wording of the motion, at point 4 about bringing back an updated paper with the improved data in 9 months' time. If that data was available much sooner, that could be done sooner, I assume.
Yeah, I think you're speaking about the amendment there, point 4.
Sorry, yeah, the amendment. What did I say?
Councillor Forbes.
Councillor Stewart, yes, I mean, I picked 9 months as what I thought was a reasonable time. We're going to have to get to October and beyond for the hardcore data that we really rely on. I'd add in a little bit extra time because I think it's important that our officers can engage with their colleagues in Badenoch and Strathspey to see how theirs goes out. But I'm certainly not going to die in a ditch over 9 months, but I think it's important that we do have a timescale on it.
Thank you. We now move to Councillor Duff, your comment.
Thank you, Convener. I welcome this amendment. Representing the Highland Ward, I fully appreciate the issues surrounding the lack of affordable housing. However, this is a big decision for the committee, and it ought to be made with the benefit of the best and most accurate data and evidence that we can obtain. As we have heard, the data before us today is not fully reliable in the circumstances, and I don't feel is robust enough for us to reach a proper conclusion at this point. However, we are currently collecting that data for Perth and Kinross, and would be in a better position once all existing short-term let properties have been required to register, at which time we would have better understanding of their number, type, size and location. In an earlier paper today on developer contributions, item 5 on our agenda, it states there is a continuing need for affordable housing with significant and ongoing levels of unmet affordable housing needs existing across Perth and Kinross, particularly in the Greater Perth housing market area. And yet there is no mention in this paper of including the Greater Perth housing market area in any establishment of a control zone. I think this shows that the data being presented today is incomplete, and that we should wait for the more accurate data coming from the registration process. I would also like to hear more about the findings from the existing control zone area like Badenoch and Strathspey, how this has panned out and any lessons that are to be learned. I have a concern that application of a control zone may reduce the number of short-term lets, but in doing so principally serve to increase the number of second homes rather than the number of affordable homes. As we know, a control zone would not affect second homes in any way, and such an impact would adversely affect the local economy and do very little to resolve the lack of affordable housing. I would therefore want to hear about the experience in control zones about its effect on availability of affordable homes. Convener, it strikes me that we seem to be a bit premature in reaching this decision today, and that we should await the availability of better data following the completion of the registration process. I will therefore support the amendment and seek a deferral of this decision until more reliable data is available. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Kigali.
I'm just going to stress again the importance of data and how important it is to everything that we do, but that there is a glimmer of light, that we all seem to be on the same page and acknowledging that there is a housing supply issue. We just seem to have different ways that we're going to, we think we should need to solve it. I think it's fairly obvious to, to us on this side at least, that the issue there isn't, some small piecemeal sticking plaster approach. It is, building more homes and, freeing up the supply in that way. It is also, albeit slightly concerning to hear from Councillor Lang that he thinks this doesn't go far enough immediately. I'm sure we'll see what he means at a later date, but I hope that doesn't amount to just an attack on small tourist businesses up in his ward, but I'm sure we'll see.
Thank you, Councillor Kugali. Bailey Williamson.
I apologise, ma'am. Could you switch to
sorry, Mike. Councillor Love.
Councillor Williamson has already seconded the report. I don't think he's entitled to a second comment. Thank you.
Yes, you're quite correct, and I'll move on. Thank you. Councillor Welch.
I'm hearing a lot of talk about accuracy of data, and I guess the point I would like to make is nothing will get done if we wait for 100% accuracy of data. All good decisions are made on the basis of having enough data to decide that the next step is actually worth taking. Nothing would get done in this country if we waited for extreme accuracy of data. We would just do nothing, and I'm concerned that that's the point of this amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duff, we've taken your point of order. I see no further requests for comment, and I would invite Councillor Forbes to sum up for the amendment.
Thanks, Convener. In summing up, I just want to reiterate what I said earlier on. This is not, and I repeat, not about the principle of controlling short-term lets. This is about the principle of making good decisions based on accurate data. I can't remember who made a comment just a second ago about waiting forever. I'm not suggesting that we wait for 100% data. I'm suggesting that we wait until we get the absolutely key starting point of data, which will be in October. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And in summing up for the motion, I want to make 3 points, if I may. Firstly, I reject the typification by the move of the amendment of this paper as rushed together and shoddily put together and lacking evidence.
Point of order, Convener. I didn't use the word shoddily. I'd be grateful if you would just clarify that.
My apologies. I'm simply interpreting what I believe your view of it, but I thank you. Yes, I apologise. Moving on then to the matter of evidence. A lot of the questioning has revolved around the issue of evidence and its substantiveness. And for sure, there are gaps in the evidence. And over time, those gaps in the evidence can be filled. But the purpose of this consultation is to add to that evidence by consultation. And that is an important part of what we are doing. The consultation of itself will add not necessarily statistical evidence, but will add qualitative evidence of the lived experience. And that is important in this process. And together, this consultation will leave us better informed if we move ahead now. In due course of time, when the consultation is complete, we will have the access to additional statistical evidence, and together we can move forwards to present, if on the balance of that evidence, we can move forward to present proposals for making change. And the final matter I'd want to address in summing up is the matter of confidence. People are calling us, wait until we see what happens in Edinburgh, wait until we see more results from what Highland Council have done in Badenoch and Strathspey. And I would call on this council, if you like, to be confident in our own views, confident in our own officers' ability to take matters forward as we want them for Perth and Kinross, not to simply wait to see what others do and see how it waits for them. I believe we have the prima facie evidence to move to a consultation now, and we do not need to rely on the experience of others. and I urge people to support the motion. Thank you. I think it's now appropriate to move to the vote.
Okay, thanks, convener. So we'll now go to a roll call vote in line with section 21 of the council standing orders. We have a motion proposed by Councillor Parrott, seconded by Bailey Williamson, which is to approve the recommendations as detailed in the report. And we have an amendment proposed by Councillor Forbes, seconded by Councillor Cuthbert, the details of which have been displayed on the screen. When I call your name, if you can indicate whether you're voting for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Allen.
Amendment.
Bailey.
Motion.
Councillor Carr.
Motion.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Forbes.
Amendment.
Councillor Harvey.
Motion.
Councillor Kogali.
Amendment.
Councillor Lang.
Motion.
Bailey McLaren.
Motion.
Convener. Councillor Smith.
Amendment.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Welsh.
Motion.
And Bailey Williamson.
Motion.
So we have 8 votes for the motion and 7 votes for the amendment. Therefore, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. We'll now move forward to item 8 on the agenda. Okay, I see there's a request in for a comfort break. We have been going for some considerable time. Can we take 10 minutes and come back at 12:05? Thank you. Okay, members, thank you. We'll now move on to paper 8, the Perth City of Light Action Plan Update 2023, and I'll ask John McCrone to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. This report advises members of progress, outputs and spend on the City of Light capital programme against original objectives to support development of the evening economy, provide opportunities for businesses to benefit from enhanced turnover through increased visitation and dwell time, develop innovative approaches to lighting design which delivers safety and assists with orientation for both pedestrians and road users, prioritises lighting designs that will reduce energy use cost and minimise light pollution, and develop and augment character. Lighting and projects implemented to date complement broader cultural investment within the city and elsewhere via framework agreement with Light and subsidiaries. Investment has generated some of the highest levels of local engagement through social media and achieved global international reach and recognition because of renowned international lighting artists involved in installation and lighting projection content. Business benefits in driving footfall to the city centre have been assessed and quantified as part of lighting events, integrating growth in visits, dwell time and expenditure in hospitality businesses in the winter months, albeit these relate to pre-pandemic events. Lower operational costs have been achieved due to improved technology and energy efficiency. Funding of 784,000 remains and would support delivery of lighting at St John's Kirk, entrances to the city centre and the city itself, further investment in Perth Vennels and required additional maintenance costs which have yet to be committed. This would create a more cohesive offer to market and promote and achieve greater benefits. Links with place-based funding are also noted in respect of previously agreed leverage for the Perth Transport Futures Phase 4 Perth People Place. It is recommended that the committee considers the remaining proposed projects and refers any decision on future spend to Finance and Resources Committee. Happy to take any questions on the report or appendices.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. It might seem like a daft question, but 410, sorry, I'm still quite new to this and learning. So at 410 it says, from the original 5 million lighting action plan, 500,000 was wired in 2018 to meet the cost of external lighting. In 2018, 65,000 was also wired. I'm not sure what wired and wired means. Can somebody explain that, please?
Apologies, Convener.
Okay. Wired is a typo and should be wired, and wired means moving money from one area to another within delegated powers. I'm sure I think I'm correct on that, but I'm sure I'll be put right if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Could I comment, Convener?
Please do, John.
Yes, so it was movement from that part of the capital programme primarily to link in with the investment in Perth Museum as part of a single contract, and likewise in terms of the investment in St Paul's Church. So it was to achieve efficiencies in relation to the management of resources and the implementation of the capital projects.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. I have a few questions, but happy for other people to jump in. My first question is, my recollection is that when we in the last term were first told about the lighting action plan, the £5 million allocated to it was to be match funded. So I just wonder how much of the £4,216,000, how much match funding has already been brought in by that spend?
John, can you address that?
I don't have a precise figure. But I can certainly come back and provide information around that. The vast majority has been as a result of expenditure via the capital programme. Some elements in terms of match funding were achieved, particularly in relation to some of the creative lighting installations working with Culture Perth and Kinross as part of the implementation, but I can come back with a more precise figure. I don't have that to hand.
Please do.
Thanks. My next question is about the in the actual attachment is about the risks of discontinuing the programme, which is on page 25, and then the summary of the benefits of the project so far on page 23. I just wondered the benefits, the summary of the benefits of the project, have there been any disadvantages, and for the risks of discontinuing the programme, are there any pros to discontinuing the project?
So in terms of the first question, within the supporting information, we have shown where work packages under that framework agreement have already been instructed. The framework was secured on the basis of an overall package of 5 million. So there is the potential for challenge within that context from those that have been appointed through the framework. That's the main risk. And that is something that we will only know as and when any decisions taken. In relation to the benefits, disbenefits, the benefits are as outlined in terms of those original objectives and what primarily can be achieved in terms of encouraging more people into the city centre and indeed other towns where investment has also been made in relation to encouraging people to come back and use hospitality businesses and indeed stay longer into the night, spend more money, and hopefully stay over and use all facilities. In terms of disbenefits, the disbenefits are largely mitigated through the design process, and essentially that would be things like light pollution and potential impact on adjacent residential property, but these are addressed through appropriate design to ensure that those disbenefits are taken away by and large.
Thanks for that. Okay, the last 2 pages of the report, 69 and 70, are visitor comments, and they're quite supportive, gushing even about the events that have gone on. Not maybe specifically so much about the lights by them, the lighting, all the lighting by itself. I wondered why there are only positive social media comments rather than, for example, all of the many negative social media comments that get posted up, and indeed the comments that were submitted to the council through the budget consultation process in terms of what the public want to see us spending their money on.
I think we have been trying to capture that in terms of benefits earlier in the report. It does acknowledge concerns that were raised, as a generality through the budget process, albeit these varied depending on the location of those that were commenting. We do get indications of support within the city itself, but maybe not in other areas. So apologies if that has presented a skewed picture. Generally the comments that we have are reflective of a very positive tone that has come back in relation to those that have either witnessed some of the lighting content on media channels or indeed participated. I think the comment in relation to the relationship with lighting events is well made, and it is always very difficult to attribute specific benefits purely to the lighting in itself. Some of those comments do indeed relate to additional animation, but that would not have occurred without that supporting infrastructure and the ability to provide dynamic lighting content as part and parcel of those lighting events, and also to celebrate other events and respond to requests in relation to lighting being initiated to reflect specific colour theming. So in response to that earlier comment, we do have the ability to colour the city in different ways and to reflect requests to indicate our support for various initiatives. So I recognise and accept the comments that are made. Not all comments have been positive. The comments that have not been positive have generally been related to, is this wise spend within the context of overall capital priorities and the impact in relation to energy, which again we've attempted to provide information to show that the investment has actually reduced energy costs and overall operational costs through improved technology and reduce energy costs to allow objective consideration of those issues which appear to be the primary concerns.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll move now to Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to be a bit parochial actually. At page 158, in terms of the works committed but not completed, it talks about money for Aberfeldy Stage 2. I just wondered if you can give me a wee bit detail of what that involves, please.
I suspect that relates to the investment that's already been made. There is not, that, as far as I'm aware, any additional investment proposed or any demand for such. So investment was made as part and parcel of the improvements to the square. So that may be a factual error.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, When we were doing the budget process, there was a consultation carried out with a lot of residents in Perth and Kinross. I read the raw data behind that with all the comments, and it was littered with comments about the lighting and how constituents couldn't afford to light their own homes, and we were giving the wrong message by lighting bridges and things like that. I just wondered whether the comments that were in that questionnaire were looked at before preparing this report.
Yes, indeed, and we did specifically give the figure, which is an £1,800 energy saving in relation to the bridge, in relation to what was there previously, and have shown roughly what that means in terms of actual running costs, which is the equivalent of two kilowatt heaters per annum. So the actual costs in terms of running are relatively low because of primarily because of use of LED lighting and the like. So it's actually resulted in a reduced energy cost, but we appreciate the concerns that are out there in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Duff has a second question.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting information in the report about light festivals across the UK and elsewhere in the world and their effect on the economy. And obviously, the conclusion obviously is that it would be good to have a city centre light art trail for Perth that could be advertised and marketed as such. Do you have any idea what the potential impact of that might be on the local economy? Thank you.
Well, again, the information's there in relation to comparative evidence from elsewhere and the potential benefits in relation to particularly support of the evening economy. In terms of a specific number around what that means in the local context, the answer is no. We don't have a number in terms of what that would actually generate, and that's partly because we don't have the full product in place yet, nor indeed some of those additional remaining elements commissioned. The things that's likely to attract more people is that dynamic content. So there's the architectural lighting of buildings, which creates a sort of backdrop and that opportunity to colour theme on occasions. And then there's lighting installations by international artists of renown, several which are referenced within the report, and also to use some of those digital platforms as we have in Mill Street to feed more local content, where we work with cultural colleagues to try and promote additional artistic content from the local area. So those are the things that encourage resident markets to come in terms of seeing some of that local work, and visitor audiences in terms of known names and people just wanting to come and see some of those things. So it's a mix and balance between the resident market and the visitor market. But what we're trying to say is that a more cohesive content based on the original 5 million and those remaining works would add value and allow us to promote in conjunction with other events and cultural offers within the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just wondering if I can get a little bit of clarity on the electricity costs. So there's a figure of £1,569.50p per year for all fixtures. Is that all fixtures just on the bridge, or is that all fixtures across the whole city?
The figures we have provided are in relation to the bridge, responding to that specific concern raised as part and parcel of the budget process. Clearly, we don't have all the figures because some of the work is still in the process of being installed and tested. So we will provide that as and when all the equipment is installed and it's fully in operational. But we focused in on the ones that were the subject of the main concern and where we had the evidence because it was in operation.
Thanks, John. So at this point in time, you don't know the total electricity cost for the whole of the lighting setup, for want of a better phrase. Is that fair? And if you don't, when do you think we'd see that?
We can do a quantification on the basis of the works that are to be installed and give you an estimate based on the operational costs from those that are installed and those that are in the process. But generally, the evidence suggests that it will certainly be reduced in comparison where there's existing installations, and will be run at a low operational cost because of the life of the equipment that is now available and the operational costs associated with LED in particular. So I'll endeavour to see whether I can get a figure to you based on that.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks. I was just doing thanks, Convener. I was just doing a quick sort of calculation there. If the electricity cost of the bridge is comparable to its actual installation cost, then you would be looking at about 12.5 times that amount for the total plan. But actually, that would pale into insignificance, even at a sort of 20 or 30,000 pounds a year. That would pale into insignificance against the interest charges on the capital borrowing, wouldn't it? At £4.25 million and roughly 40,000-ish per million, we'd be looking at 160, maybe 200,000 pounds. Is that the right sort of ballpark figure in terms of interest charges?
Again, I would need to defer to financial colleagues because clearly some of it relates to what's already installed and what has to be installed and changes in borrowing costs. But again, I can take that away and give a more precise figure around that.
I think Stephen Quell wants to come in to contribute to this answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in terms of the interest on the loan charges, it does vary per project, and it will be based on the sort of the lifespan of the asset. So the 40,000 per million will be relevant in some areas, but it might not necessarily be the exact cost for this project. So we would have to go away and look exactly the sort of cost of interest payments for the specific lighting project and come back to you with that.
Thank you. I see no further requests for questions, so I will move the report. This report updates members on the City of Light Action Plan, which was approved in 2016 with initial works commencing in 2017. It reviews the outputs and outcome of the work undertaken to date relative to the original objectives and outlines works which have not yet been committed within the framework contract linked to the current pause on spend in the Lighting Action Plan capital programme. The report provides information on the original approved plan and its links with key strategies of the Perth City Plan in seeking to enhance the public realm and transport infrastructure, support development of cultural and evening economy through the creation of opportunities for businesses to benefit from enhanced turnover through increased visitation related to dynamic, creative and architectural lighting. Procurement and implementation has developed innovative approaches to lighting design which deliver safety and assist with orientation for both pedestrians and road users, and prioritises lighting designs that have reduced energy use, cost and minimise light pollution, and are beginning to develop and augment Perth's and other towns' character at night. Both placemaking and lighting resources within the capital programmes have been aligned and moved to the Cultural Investment Programme to consolidate resources and accelerate investment in the surrounding public realm, routes linking cultural venues and creative lighting. This increased the capacity for the integration and development of public art with enhanced use of surrounding space and routes for events and markets, along with the improvement and animation of adjacent buildings. The report notes that the implementation of lighting projects is linked with wider place-based investment plans. The Sustrans Community Links Plus programme applied for in 2019 to deliver the Perth People Place project, which is now progressing to design stage. As part of the recovery of the city and area, With resident and tourism volume and value still not back to pre-pandemic levels, the city requires an offer that sustains existing business and supports growth. In that respect, a proactive approach to investment is needed to encourage increased use of the city centre as a place for social interaction, greater dwell time in the evening, and increased use by visitors and locals alike. I am happy to accept the recommendations of the report and move the paper for approval. And can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report? Thank you.
Happy to second, convener.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart has an amendment.
Thanks, convener. I'm very grateful to officers for bringing this report forward in response to prior requests to get an update on how valuable or on what value we have spent so far on the City of Light Action Plan. But I don't think that we can any longer support capital spend on this. I don't believe it's a priority for the council, given the position of the capital budget, and I certainly don't believe, from having reviewed the budget consultation responses from the public, that it is by any stretch of the imagination a priority for our taxpayers. I'm not sure. So specifically here in point 3 of the recommendation, we are being asked to consider the remaining proposed projects and refer any decision on future spend to Finance and Resources Committee. I'm entirely happy to let Finance and Resources Committee make that decision, but I just think that the recommendation from this committee should be that we don't proceed with further spend on the lighting action plan. In 4.7 of the report, we note that implementation was paused for 18 months as a result of restrictions on capacity during the pandemic, but design and purchase of equipment continued to be progressed. I find it surprising that during the pandemic, the City of Light Action Plan was seen as a continuing priority for council staff. In 4.12, we're told that the lighting projects implemented to date have generated some of the highest levels of local engagement through social media. That is undoubtedly true, and I've seen it myself. I've taken some great pictures at the Winter Light Nights myself, but I just don't believe that in terms of following the public pound represents best value. In terms, spending £4.25 million in order to generate some great social media engagement is not a good use of money. Turning to the updated information in the appendix, I've got a real issue when we're told that a risk of discontinuing the programme is that it reduces the council's ability to meet our national and local single outcome agreement. I can understand that part of that single outcome agreement will be about economic development, but there are far higher priorities within that single outcome agreement that our residents would rather see us spending money on. I note that a large part of the following section is about the Winter Light Nights. I was your equivalent convener 5 years ago in the 2018 Light Night, which is mentioned in the executive summary on page 57, convener. And I absolutely guarantee you, people did not come for the lights, they came for the events. They came to see the dragons, or they came to see the dinosaurs, or they came to see the Batmobile, not the pretty purple light under the tunnel on the Queen's Bridge. And finally, on the issue of or returning to the issue of the social media comment, as I said in as I made clear in the questions, we've got a couple of pages here of positive visitor comments all about the events. The lighting provides a backdrop for the events, but it is the events that people come for. The comments that you read continually from members of the public, the representations that we get in our community councils, particularly out in the rural wards, where £750,000 of remaining spend in this budget applied to capital projects would transform certain things. Councillor Welsh was with me at a community council where on Monday evening just this week, where we were talking about literal local heritage crumbling away. And the issue is that in our rural communities particularly, we feel underserved by a programme of lighting in the city, while we're not seeing benefit of capital investment in our local communities. I think the recommendation of the committee should be to finance and resources should be to discontinue the remainder of the programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Do you have a seconder for your proposal, Councillor Cuthbert?
Thank you, Convener. I'll be slightly briefer than Councillor Stewart. In essence, what we're being asked to do here is to approve the £784,000 that's not yet been spent. The majority of that is actually for the gateways. I'm not actually sure that people are really going to appreciate or come to Perth just look at gateways as they come into the town, as they drive past them. The other things are the St John's Kirk and the Vennels. And in essence, I think we could probably spend this money better elsewhere where it's needed more. We are in a financial crisis, and there are things we could be doing with this money which would be better served.
Thank you. And the Councillor Leader, point of clarification.
Thanks, Convener. I didn't think that we were here today authorising the spend of that other £750,000. I thought that was going to be decided at Finance and Resources Committee. So it was just a point of clarity on the back of Councillor Cuthbert's comments there that we were being asked today to commit to that spend.
My understanding of the paper is that we are, if we approve the paper, we are suggesting that we wish to move ahead with the remainder of the programme, but a decision on the funding for that part of the programme would be made by Finance and Resources in view of the previous decision. But in the meantime, officers will look for other funding sources by grants and otherwise for funding that part of the programme that hasn't been committed to yet. So funding, we will seek funding for it. Council funding would only be if Finance and Resources makes a positive decision in respect of that. My understanding of the amendment proposed is that if the amendment is passed, we are saying to Finance and Resources we do not wish to proceed with the rest of the programme, and therefore the matter of the £784,000 falls because it's not needed. Can I have confirmation from the move of the amendment that that's correct? He nods. Yep. Does that clarify it for you, Leader of the Council?
Probably, well, it'd be my own inability to get my head around it. My reading of it was that we make a recommendation to Finance and Resources that we move ahead, but Finance and Resources Committee will have the ultimate thing. So there's no decision made on the actual spend today. But that wasn't what I got from Councillor Cuthbert when you seconded it. We said we were asking today to spend it. I just want clarity, and today is not the decision. The decision is a recommendation to the committee, which can ignore or go with that recommendation.
But voting for the motion says that we wish to continue with the programme, but council funding will only be if Finance and Resources accepts that. Otherwise, we will look for grant funding to continue those items of the programme.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yep. The amendment is saying that if we pass the amendment, committee is saying to Finance and Resources, we do not wish to continue the programme. Bailey, you comment.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the amendment today. I think we have to give credit to our colleagues, and maybe some of us were in the room in 2016 when this was originally decided, that The capital budget had presumably a lot more space in it at that time. This was good ambition. It was probably the right decision for that time. But now looking at it, really, Councillor Stewart had me on the points of the fact about the cost of the borrowing of this money, that the actual cost to put the electricity through the LEDs is not the concern, it's the borrowing cost, and he had me there. And also at the fact that we have to look at the following the public pound here, that this amount of money is very expensive for some favourable comments on Twitter, on Facebook. There are more impactful things, many of them, that we could spend this money on if we are to curtail this. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further comment? No. 5 minutes.
And Councillor Cuthbert and Stewart have said, my feeling is that the decision should go to finance and resources, and a space being given for officers to try and find funding elsewhere, and then an informed decision can be made then whether they manage to find match funding or any sort of funding to reduce it. No one needs to tell me about the capital or anybody within here about the state of the capital budget at PKC. So that's what I motion. I have a lot of sympathy with it, with the amendment, but I think the final decision at FNR is a sensible way to go. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I'm kind of torn on this because I have a huge amount of sympathy with what Councillor Stewart is trying to do here. It is a lot of money. I'm particularly keen that we see the centre of Perth remain illuminated around St John's Kirk. There does seem to be some dubiety here about whether that funding should have or already has been allocated through the money for the new museum, and I just wonder if we can get some clarity on if that's the case or not.
That's actually a question at this juncture, which is too late. Yeah. Indeed. John McCrone, are you able to answer that particular point?
I am. St John's Kirk is not included within the scope of the Perth Museum Works. The red line was essentially at the kind of front of the kirk, so that would be work out with the scope of Perth Museum project, and would need to tie in with the current work that is being implemented with repair of the kirk, etc. So that has not been committed in any way, shape and form in terms of any previous allocations.
I hope that was a useful clarification. Thank you. I see there are no further requests for comment, so we will move to the vote on this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Again, we'll now go to a roll call vote in line with section 21 of the Council's standing orders. Excuse me. We have a motion proposed by Councillor Parrott, seconded by Bailey Williamson, which is to approve the recommendations as detailed in the report. And we have an amendment proposed by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Cuthbert, which is this committee cancels any of the remaining monies to be used for the lighting programme going forward. So when I call your name, if you can indicate whether you're voting for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Allen.
Motion.
Bailey.
Amendment.
Councillor Carr.
Motion.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Amendment.
Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Forbes.
Motion.
Councillor Harvey.
Motion.
Councillor Kogali.
Motion.
Councillor Lang.
Motion.
Bailey McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Parrott. Councillor Smith.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Welsh.
Motion.
And finally, Bailey Williamson.
Motion.
We have 12 votes for the motion and 3 votes for the amendment. Therefore, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. We now move to paper 9, which is the proposed 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. This paper comes to committee because of the made late and a time had to be allowed for discussion with objectors and to give them opportunity to withdraw their objections. But because they have not withdrawn their objections, that is the reason that this paper has to come to committee. Can I ask Brian Cargill to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The Council introduced a number of temporary 20-mile-per-hour speed limits as part of the Spaces for People project. On completion of the temporary traffic regulation orders and following consultation with elected members, community councils and local communities, the Council wishes to make the temporary 20-mile-per-hour speed limits detailed in the report permanent. In addition, it is proposed to introduce 2 further 20-mile-per-hour speed limits in Balbeggie and St David's, following requests for a reduced speed limit from these 2 communities. During the consultation process, 4 objections were received, and as a result of these objections, we are required to present a report to committee asking that the objections be considered and set aside. The objections received cited air pollution, climate change, congestion, the length of the proposed speed limits, and road safety as the main areas of concern. The Council's air quality team advised that the only location out of the 54 20-mile-per-hour speed limit zones which currently has air pollutant levels close to the exceeding national objectives is Perth. However, this is also the area that will likely see the largest emissions benefit from the 20-mile-per-hour zones due to the reduced acceleration time between frequent stops in and around the city centre. The air quality team advised that they have not seen a notable rise in air pollution attributable to the 20-mile-per-hour zones in any location since they were introduced, and their continued use would not result in this changing. The air quality team also don't have any air quality concerns about the 2 new speed limit areas proposed in the report. So in summary, there is no evidence to support the objection that the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits will have a detrimental effect on air pollution or climate change. And there is no evidence to support the objection that the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits will increase congestion or create road safety issues. The locations and the lengths of the speed limits have been agreed with elected members, community councils and local communities. And it's the Scottish Government's stance on 20-mile-per-hour speed limits is that although there may be a slight increase in emissions from 20-mile-per-hour zones in some cases, the large benefits to road safety outweigh any emissions increases. The report outlines the objections and provides the responses sent to the objectors and recommends that these objections are set aside and the orders are promoted. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions with regard to this report? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. I just wanted to clarify that in some of these areas that I'm aware of in Ward 2, I presume that the same will be the case elsewhere in the local authority area. Either local members representing the community or community councils had asked for some of these zones to be extended. Approving these zones today doesn't preclude future extensions, but the issue, if I'm correct, is that you simply need to take the existing temporaries and make them permanent. Is that, if you want to just confirm that for the...
Yeah, that's exactly the case. The temporary traffic regulation order, I think it ran for something like 2 years, so that has now expired. So as it stands, we require to make it permanent or otherwise. There are a number of other requests that we've received since these 20-mile-per-hour speed limits have went in, and the intention is to address these and any amendments at a future date as well, as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Just looking for the reference again, but in number 2 in the table, it talks about the A827 around Lochte at Fernan. If I recall correctly, there may have been a tweak to that that meant that we kept a 30 mile an hour on the A827 as it passes by Fernan, but the 20 mile an hour would be within the village roads in itself. I'm not sure if that's part of this or whether that's a subsequent tweak, if you like, to the scheme. But I thought that was my understanding. I'm not sure if Mr. Cargill could confirm that.
We have an answer.
That is correct. The 827 through Fiernan will become a 30 mile per hour. Fiernan is included within this order because the two minor roads within Fiernan are going to be 20 mile per hour. The 30 mile per hour will go through in a separate traffic regulation order, which is currently being advertised.
Thank you. Bailey.
It's a very quick question and maybe a request more than a question. When I was reading the report, I found it quite difficult to process the objections because they weren't tied to a particular proposal. Was that because the objectors just objected overall, or were these tied to a particular proposal? Thank you.
The objectors were simply objecting in principle and not to any specific schemes. And Brian, if you want to confirm that, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, I would just confirm that they never really objected to a specific proposal. It was mainly an overall generalised objection to blanket 20 mile per hour speed limits.
Are there any further questions? If not, I will move the report. This report provides members with details of the 4 objections that were received during the statutory consultation process for the Perth and Kinross Council 20 mile an hour variation order. The order seeks to promote a traffic regulation order to make the 20 mile an hour speed limits that were introduced on a temporary basis permanent. The speed limits were originally introduced under the Council's Spaces for People project to make it safer to travel actively while COVID restrictions and social distancing were in place. The objectors do not believe that the proposed 20 mile an hour speed limits should be made permanent. They believe that some of the sites are not appropriate and that the 20 mile an hour speed limits will be detrimental to air quality, increase vehicle emissions, affect the carbon footprint and create congestion. Research from the Department of Transport has shown that 20 mile an hour speed limits have a negligible effect on air quality within urban environments. There is no evidence to support the suggestion that 20 mile an hour speed limits create congestion. Following the initial installation of the 20 mile an hour speed limits, each site has been reviewed. Some of the sites have been amended with some reduced in length. At some sites, additional 20 mile an hour signage has been provided. Where it was assessed that 20 mile an hour speed limits are no longer appropriate, it has been discussed with elected members and community councils. At these sites, the speed limit will be returned to 30 mile an hour, or in some cases, a new 30 mile an hour limit will be introduced. The Traffic and Network team regularly receive requests for 20 mile an hour speed limits from elected members, community councils and local residents. The 20 mile an hour speed limits in this report have been progressed in consultation with and the support of elected members and community councils. The 20 mile an hour speed limits have improved safety for the most vulnerable road users across the Perth and Kinross area. It is therefore recommended to move this paper without amendment to allow the traffic regulation order to be promoted as advertised, and I'm happy to move the report. Can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Happy to second, convener.
Thank you. Comment, Councillor Duff.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I welcome the report and the confirmation of these 20 mile an hour zones. They're not perfect as anything, but they do, I think, in conjunction with our vehicle activated speed sign coverage, they do have an impact on drivers, and if you watch, they do slow down. And yes, there are those who abuse the speed limit, certainly, and that's an entirely separate issue. But the majority of people, I think, do adhere to them. And as I say, I welcome the extension of the 20 mile an hour zones, particularly in my ward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other requests for comment? I see none. Can we approve the report? Agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes today's business. Thank you all for your attendance, and I hope you enjoy the rest of what is hopefully outside a sunny day. Thank you.